Chapter 1008. Where's Miss Lanshaw from? I'm from the north. As for my exact location, without the prefix brand, the north naturally included the northern wilderness. Lanshaw raised her thin eyebrows slightly and glanced at Tang, who was still smiling foolishly. She smiled and said, "Did he not tell you, Miss Josiah?" "Oh, he probably forgot to tell you." Josiah narrowed her eyes when she heard this. Her expression did not change, and she continued to smile. "I was careless. I didn't ask." What she meant was that as long as I asked, Tang In would definitely tell me. But asking Miss Lanshaw now is the same, isn't it? Hee hee. Then let Tang and tell Miss Josiah. "I'm sorry, my identity is a bit sensitive. It's not suitable for me to announce it to the public." "Is that so? Then I was rude." "It's okay." Miss Josiah didn't know beforehand. Miss was a title that had been misused in the modern world, but it was still very formal in the other world. It was usually used when meeting for the first time. And now, the way they addressed each other as Miss was just like the similar smiles and attitudes they had now. It represented politeness and politeness. And politeness, to a certain extent, were synonymous with distance and estrangement. Of course, the distance here referred to the psychological distance. On the surface, the two of them were getting closer and closer as they chatted. This was naturally because they were testing each other for the first time. Neither of them found what they wanted to see from the other, so the topic gradually deepened. However, the topic of this topic was obviously not about the clothes and makeup that ordinary women would talk about when chatting. It was not that these were too vulgar, but because neither of them was in the mood to talk about it. "I'm a bit curious. I heard that Miss Josiah used to be a noble. Why did you think of joining the Gray Coat Army?" "Hee hee, it seems that Miss Lanshaw knows me very well." "Well, there's actually no great reason. I just feel that the Empire is a bit unfair now. I can't stand it, so I want to do something to change the situation." In the end, he became the leader? Hee hee, although I'm not that familiar with Miss Josiah, just by thinking about it, I know how difficult it is to go from a noble lady to the leader of the Gray Coat Army. Miss Josiah is really amazing. But I wonder if Miss Josiah has ever thought that even if you succeed, this unfair situation won't change. What if the Gray Coat Army becomes the next Bran Empire? After a pause, Lanshaw smiled and waved his hand. "Miss Josiah, please don't misunderstand. I don't have any prejudice against the Gray Coat Army. On the contrary, I find it, well, it's very interesting and novel. But as you know, the human heart is fickle, and the taste of power is very tempting. It's not something that anyone can resist. Let's not talk about it. I feel like I'm offending someone if I continue." "How can that be?" Miss Lanshaw's thoughts are very insightful. Josiah is impressed. "I've thought about this problem before, but I didn't think that far." Josiah smiled and shook his head as if he didn't care. "In my opinion, nothing is immortal. The Bran Empire is like that, and so is the Gray Coat Army. This trend can only be slowed down by ordinary people, but it can't be stopped. But at least before the Gray Coat Army is completely corrupted, we can guarantee that we have made some changes and reduced the degree of unfairness. Even if it's just for a period of time, the commoners pay less taxes and have an extra piece of bread in their hands. This is enough for us to continue fighting for it." Lanshaw raised an eyebrow when she heard this. After a moment, she tilted her head and asked, "Is it worth it?" "It's worth it." Josiah smiled and nodded. "It's a role model. Even if the Gray Coat Army is destroyed one day, and the people want to rebuild an empire like the Bran Empire, the commoners won't agree. They will rebel like we are now. This is also the trend." After a moment of silence, the surrounding atmosphere was noisy and noisy. "Clap, clap, clap." Lanshaw clapped his hands and praised. "What an amazing idea. Although it can't be proven with facts, I think it has a very high chance of success. According to what you said, this is the trend. Miss Josiah, you really live up to your reputation." This was the truth, and it was also sincere. Although Lanshaw had previously collected information on Josiah, it wasn't much, and half of it was true and half of it was false. Therefore, if Lanshaw didn't think that this opponent was difficult to deal with, then based on these words, Lan Sha felt that he needed to reevaluate this person who came first. Of course, praise was praise, but the relationship between them and the enemies still didn't change. Because of this praise, Lan Sha even began to pay more attention to it, and he was full of fighting spirit. In terms of understanding the future of the Grey Coat Army, the suffering of the commoners, and the topics in the field of reform, Lan Sha was naturally far inferior to Josiah. This had nothing to do with IQ reaction, but it was about thinking and knowledge. Tang Yin, the cheating machine, brought about advanced thinking and knowledge. Don't misunderstand, Tang Yin was naturally not interested in reform or rebellion. But thanks to the great 9-year compulsory education and his personal experience in the modern world, although Tang Yin didn't know how to do it specifically, he knew what was right and which system was definitely better than the simple feudal monarchy of the brand. Don't underestimate the fragmented ideas of hammering here and there. In the eyes of the natives of the other world, Josiah and the others, the impact was definitely no less than seeing thousands of Mjolnir exploding in front of their eyes. This was also the reason why Losha was willing to vouch for Tang, and even though he had caused quite a commotion in the Grey Coat Army. She knew the value of these ideas. Josiah undoubtedly knew as well, perhaps even better than Losha, because he had come into contact with Tang in much earlier. Therefore, under the subtle influence, Joshua was undoubtedly the first person in the world in terms of the ideological understanding of the reform. Of course, other than Tang Yin's influence, Josiah's personal charm was also not to be underestimated. Just as mentioned before, in terms of strength, Josiah's intermediate magician level was only enough to scare the ordinary soldiers and commoners who had never seen the power of magic before. In terms of military command, there were plenty of people in the Grey Coat Army who were better than Josiah, let alone General Brand, who was trained in a science course. In terms of logistics management, Fei Rui's talent was definitely more outstanding than hers. He seemed to know a little about everything, but he was also mediocre in everything. However, if you were to randomly pick a person from the Grey Coat Army and ask him who he respected the most, he would most likely say Josiah. This was the charm of a person. It was not the kind that looked like a vase. It was the charm and prestige that was accumulated through ordinary words and actions, unremitting efforts, and one's own character. To put it bluntly, with the unique nature of the Grey Coat Army, Josiah was the most suitable person to be the leader. No matter if it was the old King Bran or the Northern Wilderness Empress, it would be useless for anyone else to take over. After vaguely recognizing this point, Lan Sha naturally did not want to use his shortcomings to attack the enemy's strengths. After sincerely praising Fei Rui, he quickly changed the topic. Local customs, business operations, military planning, and even the anecdotes of the nobles that Josiah was most familiar with from the north to the south, to the south, to the north to the north. Then, without any suspense, Josiah was completely defeated. Lan Sha just sat there quietly with a polite smile on her lips. She spoke at a moderate pace and hit the nail on the head. She was like a great scholar who had read a lot, like a big shot in the business world who had experienced many ups and downs, and even more like a general who could maneuver freely. Although the character's temperament kept changing in Josiah's eyes, he perfectly mastered each field. Moreover, he was familiar with the field of real combat. Josiah, who was also involved in the various fields of the Grey Coat Army, knew this very well. There was no smoke on the battlefield, and there was back and forth. If Josiah had shocked Lan Sha just now, then Lan Sha had directly turned Josiah into an audience. It was not that he could not get a word in, but in fact, Lan Sha did not agitate or argue eloquently or aggressively. Not only was her speaking speed not fast, but she also paused to communicate from time to time. She took good care of the conversation atmosphere. And because of this, when Josiah spread his hands and smiled time and time again, indicating for her to speak first, the helplessness and frustration in his heart kept multiplying. The more she spoke now, the more mistakes she made. Even if she was right, the feedback that immediately came back was a deeper level of insight, and there was no place to refute. Because he did not understand, forcefully refuting would only be more embarrassing. After spreading his hands with a smile again, Josiah confirmed two things. First, this smiling Lan Sha in front of him did not come with good intentions. Second, she was definitely not just a rich girl from a business family. After confirming these 2 points, Josiah instantly became vigilant. Just as Lan Sha did not think highly of Josiah before, Josiah actually did not think highly of Lan Sha before. Even when she saw the other party dressed up before dinner and faintly sensed something, she did not really take it to heart. It was obvious. In this tent, she only knew Tang Yin. So, this dressing up naturally could not be for Fry and David to see. However, Josiah did not care about this. She had confidence in herself and Tang Yin. But now her confidence was a little lacking. Looking at the calm and confident Lan Sha, Josiah unconsciously straightened his body and his eyes became sharp, like a cat protecting its food. He raised his wine glass and interrupted with a chuckle. Miss Lan Sha is knowledgeable and multi-talented. Josiah admires you. Here's a toast to you. Thank you. Slightly stunned, Lan Sha also raised her wine glass with a smile, made a small toast, pursed her lips, and drank. She smiled. I really didn't expect that when my husband randomly saved someone, he actually... Oh, sorry, I forgot that Miss Lan Sha doesn't understand my husband's meaning. Josiah hesitated and seemed to be a little embarrassed. Then he leaned close to Lan Sha and whispered in her ear, "This is a little secret between Tang Yin and me. Outsiders don't know. But if it's Miss Lan Sha, it's not a big deal. Well, it's actually nothing. This is what Tang Yin calls his lover in his hometown. It's similar to the meaning of darling." He straightened his body and blinked at Lan Sha, who was slightly stiff. "Please help us keep it a secret, Miss Lan Sha. Thank you." His 5 fingers instantly clenched the wine glass. "Ha, of course. Ha, Tang Yin, your hometown has so many weird customs. By the way, where are we just now? Oh, I didn't expect that the person my husband randomly saved would be so knowledgeable. It really opened Josiah's eyes tonight. Unfortunately, if my husband could meet Miss Lan Sha earlier, Josiah would definitely have one more sister now. Maybe the Gray Coat Army would have one more eye-catching talent. Huh. I'm just afraid that you can't afford it. Haha, is that so? Miss Josiah, you're really overpraising me. No, I used to only admire the thinking and knowledge of 2 people. One is Aunt Luo Sha, and the other is my husband. But now that I met Miss Lan Sha, I know that my experience is shallow." Calling him husband left, and right was like a dagger stabbing into his heart. That's right, this was Josiah's way of fighting back, a flawless way of fighting back. "Don't you like Tang Yin? Sorry, he's taken. He's now Josiah's man." "Oh no, he's my husband." Hong Guo declared her sovereignty with a hint of flaunting. However, what Lan Sha didn't want to hear the most was this. How should she fight back? In fact, no matter how she fought back, she wouldn't be able to hold her ground. Because, after all, she came later. Of course, the quick-witted Lan Sha wasn't someone to be trifled with. After noticing that the situation was a little messy, she immediately calmed down, smiled, and raised her wine glass, and threw the dagger back. "On the way here, I heard from Tang and that he has a lover in the Gray Coat Army, which is Miss Josiah. By the way, since you have a nickname, you must be married now, right? It's a pity that I met Miss Josiah too late, so I didn't have time to send you a congratulatory gift." She shook her head, looking very regretful. Josiah's gaze suddenly froze when she heard this. She looked at Lan Sha, then smiled and said, "Sorry, it seems that I really have to accept Miss Lan Sha's gift." "Of course, that's no problem. And don't tell me you're not married yet." Lan Sha's eyes instantly widened, as if it was the first time she heard this. She poked the dagger again. "Sorry, I was too excited. But, Miss Josiah, you really should consider it. After all, if you're not married, you don't have a status. Some things are really hard to say." This was a clear indication of their intentions. If the greeting before was a preliminary test, and the deep conversation was a long-range attack, then now that the 2 of them were talking about Tang Yin, it was undoubtedly a close combat. Looking at Lan Sha, who seemed to be reminding her out of kindness, this time it was Josiah's turn to hold her wine glass tightly. She narrowed her eyes and smiled. Just as she opened her mouth to say something, a voice suddenly sounded beside her. Tang. Oh, now he's called Enai Laoang. Huh? Come, let me toast you. Hey, this is the first glass of wine I'm drinking with him tonight. David, you have to give me some face, so don't stop me. Turning around, it was Fei Rue. He had a drunken look on his face as he walked straight towards Tang In with a wine glass in his hand. Under the cheers of the crowd, David, who had already stood up to stop Fei Rue, scratched his head and smiled as he let Fei Rue go. Oh, it's Fei Rue. I heard that you're doing very well in the logistics department. You even have the nickname of a cheapskate, right? Ha! I didn't use my connections to send you there in vain. I knew that with your intelligence, you would definitely make a name for yourself. Come, let's go. Of course, you have to drink your first glass of wine. The more he drank, the more he talked. After a long speech, Tang In also stood up with a drunken look on his face. He clinked his glass with Fei Rue's and drank without hesitation. Fei Rue filled his glass again and invited Josiah and Lan Sha to drink. With this interlude, the sparks between Josiah and Lan Sha were almost extinguished. Fei Rue's freckled face turned even redder after he drank 3 glasses in a row. He shook his head and rolled his eyes at the crowd who wanted another round. He waved his hand and complained, I knew I shouldn't have come tonight. You're all so frustrated. Do you want to take revenge on me? Huh. Most of the people present were from the military. It could be said that they had all suffered at the hands of Fei Rue, the cheapskate who was in charge of the logistics department. Fei Rue threw his glass away and grabbed the can of wine. All right, it's only a matter of time anyway. Tonight, I'll go all out. If you have any complaints or dissatisfaction with me, just drink them all in the wine and forget about it. Who's first? Okay, damn. Is the cheapskate shedding his feathers tonight? He's so forthright. It's not easy. I'll go first. Count me in, but... Let me finish, but Fei Rue shook the can of wine and pointed at Tang In and the other two with a smile. Miss Lan Sha is a guest. How can we let the guests watch while we drink? So let's send Miss Lan Sha back to rest first. Also, Enai Laoang drank quite a bit tonight. Let him and the leader leave together. Everyone, please understand. They haven't seen each other for such a long time, and they spent the night with us bachelors. If you don't want to be retaliated against like me, Seeing Fei Rue's hesitant expression and that wretched smile of his, everyone burst into laughter, saying that they understood. Joshua, who was at the side, was stunned when he heard that. He lowered his head in embarrassment. Lan Sha raised her eyebrows and looked at Fei Rue thoughtfully. She seemed to have understood something. Damn, you brat. Tang In wasn't happy to be teased. He stood up and waved his hand. I'm not drunk yet. Let's get drunk tonight. Haha, you said you're not drunk. Don't you know that drunk people always say they're not drunk? Fei Rue quickly pressed down on Tang In's arm and continued to tease him. However, he was laughing bitterly in his heart. Tang In, why don't you take a look at the situation now? I've already risked hundreds of pounds for you, and you're still trying to undermine me? That's right. Fei Rue, who was once praised by Tang In as a smart person, could see that something was wrong between Josiah and Lan Sha. In fact, he, who was sitting not far away, could roughly hear the exchange of words between the two. He knew that if this continued, Tang In's backyard would definitely be on fire tonight. He could not stop it. He wanted to persuade Fei Rue again. That's it then. Josiah stood up and held Tang In's arm. Let's go back and rest first. Everyone continue to drink. Yes, find someone to send Miss Lan Sha back. After understanding Lan Sha, Josiah knew that he had underestimated her tonight. She was definitely not someone who could be easily dealt with. He might as well go back and talk to Tang In first before making any plans. Lan Sha didn't object. She also felt that she wasn't in her best condition tonight and needed to adjust herself. Thus, a battle between women without any smoke was temporarily put to rest. Yes, only temporarily. Chapter 1009. The content of Fei Rue's wretched smile was, of course, impossible for it to happen. It was not that Tang In and David did not want to, but it was not the right place. This was a temporary military camp. The tents were next to each other, and there were patrolling soldiers passing by from time to time. If there was any movement, it would be like a live broadcast. Of course, if there was a strong desire, it was not impossible. With Tang Yin's strength, it was easy for him to enter and leave the camp without anyone noticing. Or he could simply let Josiah cast a silencing spell to ensure that there would be no sound. But in the end, it was not suitable. This was a strict military camp. Not far away, there were still countless soldiers buried in the mound. In such an environment, it was not suitable to have any romantic thoughts. Of course, it was still possible to enter Josiah's tent to wash up. The soft cloth on his face felt very comfortable. Tang Yin, who was lying down, could not help but let out a satisfied moan. After removing the towel, Tang Yin's face turned even redder. He raised his hand and rubbed between his eyebrows. David and the other bastards. They said they were going to drink for me, but in the end, they drank the most with me. Oh my God, you can tell? Haha, looks like you're not drunk yet. After washing the towel and drying it on the wooden rack, Josiah wiped his hands and smiled as he brought a teacup from the table. Don't blame them. Think about what you did this time. You dared to assassinate an army's commander single-handedly, and even left your last words. What do you want them to think? What do you want me to think? Tang Yin, you're not alone anymore. He frowned. At this point, it was an extremely heavy complaint. Tang Yin did not refute. He could not refute. From Josiah and David's point of view, he had indeed gone overboard this time. He acted like a hero and did not care about their feelings. But if Tang Yin could choose again, he would still do the same. He had no choice. For this kind of thing, he had to go alone. His chances of getting away safely were the highest. It was a dilemma. Fortunately, Tang Yin had returned safely, so there was no need to worry about this matter anymore. She took the teacup and pulled Josiah's arm. The latter struggled for a moment before finally lying on his shoulder obediently. Sorry, it won't happen again. Liar, do you think I don't know you? Josiah muttered as he moved his body and found a comfortable reclining position. He did not pursue the authenticity of Tang Yin's guarantee. Touching his nose, Tang Yin wisely changed the topic. By the way, have you seen Uncle and Annie? Has the family safely moved to the encampment? Yes, he is now living in Shanghai City. Who knows what he was thinking, but Josiah's eyelids drooped, and he seemed to be in low spirits. What? Did you have a fight? After taking a sip of tea, Tang Yin turned his head and asked. It was not surprising. Anyone who had been living a good life, but had inexplicably betrayed the empire and became a family member of a wanted rebel leader, would have some opinions. Not to mention that Josiah's family was a noble family with some status. And it's okay, I am prepared. Nodding and shaking his head, Josiah said in a low voice, Since I was young, father and mother have always had high expectations of me. I have the talent for magic, and father placed the hope of revitalizing the family on me. In the end, not only did I fail to fulfill their wishes, but I also broke their peaceful life. He paused, but I believe that they will understand me sooner or later. Moreover, there's no turning back now, right? Although he was laughing at himself, his tone was firm and his expression was relaxed. However, his dream was completely different from the hopes of his family. In the end, he even implicated his family. Josiah's current mood was naturally not good. Tang Yin could not do anything about this situation because it was almost an unsolvable problem. Perhaps only when the Gray Coat Army really succeeded and directly replaced the Bran Empire would their attitude have a fundamental change. He shook his head and tightened his arms around Josiah's delicate body. He chuckled and said, Yes, there is no turning back. When our Josiah becomes the supreme queen of this continent, they will become the queen's father and mother. At that time, there is no turning back even if we want to. Puffed. What queen? You really dare to talk nonsense? No. Are you mocking my father and mother? Yeah. Have I been discovered? I am wrong. I am wrong. Your Majesty, please spare me. Still calling yourself queen? You only know how to play tricks. I am beating you. Don't hide. I won't call you that. I won't call you that. Help! Your Majesty is treating human life like grass. After beating him a few times, Josiah was still shy. She was worried that this movement would attract the patrolling guards, so she could only rebuke and stare at the lazy Tang Yin. She waved her small fist to demonstrate her strength, and then she could not help but laugh. After that, the two of them chatted for a while. Most of the time, it was Josiah who was talking. For example, when they were fighting with the barbarians, the soldiers' morale was greatly boosted when they heard the sound of the drums. However, she did not have the confidence to beat the drums. She lowered her head and did not dare to look at the strange faces of the barbarians who were close to her. Another example was the experienced man, Brother Fry, who was very popular among the group of nurses in the wounded barracks. Many young girls admired him. Previously, when he injured his arm, many girls wanted to change the bandages for him. She was considering whether to play matchmaker. Brother Fry was not young anymore. These were all bits and pieces of interesting news, not important internal affairs or military affairs. However, Josiah seemed to be very interested. Sometimes, before she finished speaking, she could not help but cover her mouth and laugh secretly. Tang also laughed and listened with great interest. He was not impatient at all, until Tang finished a cup of tea. When Josiah took the empty cup and poured it again, he turned his back and asked casually, "All right, I forgot to ask before. That Miss Lan Sha is her. She is." Glancing at Josiah, who turned his head unconsciously, Tang suddenly gasped for breath. Suddenly, he smiled mischievously and said, "Ha, your patience is getting better. Wife, I thought you would ask first." Stunned, her delicate body trembled slightly. Then she shook her head gently. Josiah frowned and turned around. "Did you hear?" "Hear? Hear what?" Tang was confused. He was really drunk at the table just now, so he did not notice the secret fight between Josiah and Lan Sha. Now that he heard Josiah's question, he was a little confused, but he did not care. He continued to smile and said, "Shouldn't you see it? How is it? Wife, are you jealous when you see that I brought a beauty back?" "Ha ha, familial reminder, look after your husband, because he is really popular." Knowing that Tang really did not hear it, Josiah's depressed mood suddenly eased. If Tang saw her secret fight with another woman, but chose to stand by and watch, it would really hurt her. Fortunately, this situation did not happen. She hit Tang's shoulder in annoyance. "Okay, I know my husband is the most handsome, has the best temperament, and has the most exquisite facial features. I think you don't want to know Lan Sha's identity. Don't hit people in the face." Tang was very self-aware of his appearance. Hearing Josiah's praise on his face, he naturally knew that it was a strong ridicule. "I want to." Blinking, Josiah's tone suddenly became gentle. At the same time, her finger intentionally or unintentionally placed on Tang's waist. "Then, husband, are you going to tell me? Or are you going to tell me?" Smiling bitterly, "Give me a choice, your majesty. Tell me now." Feeling that the muscles on his waist were about to wrinkle, Tang quickly reached out and grabbed Josiah's finger. He decisively confessed, "She is Lan Sha, the Royal Highness of the Northern Wilderness. She is also the Supreme Commander of the barbarian army." A Royal Highness, Supreme Commander? Even though she had already deduced that Lan Sha's identity was not simple from her words and actions, Josiah could not help but be shocked when she heard this. However, the strange thing was that the first thing that came to her mind was not Lan Sha's dazzling and illustrious identity. Instead, she thought that it would be very, very difficult for her to get rid of Lan Sha from Tang's side. Looking at Josiah's frown, she did not seem to be shocked. Instead, she looked a little miserable. Tang could not help but be stunned. He asked in surprise, "What's with that expression?" "Her status is high. So be it. No matter how high her status is, it will only be in the Northern Wilderness. It will not affect the Gray Coat Army." "It's not that." Josiah waved his hand subconsciously. Coming back to his senses, he took a deep breath. "I remember you told me last time that you met a Royal Highness in the Northern Wilderness." "All right, and that pair of weird glasses." "Really? I should have known it was her." Shaking his head, Josiah calmed himself down and asked, "Tell me, didn't you go to assassinate the barbarian commander? Why did you bring her here?" "It's a long story. Give me the teacup. I'm thirsty." After drinking a cup of tea, Tang's drunkenness dissipated quite a bit. His thoughts were clear as he explained the entire situation. Oh, except for the part where Lan Sha seemed to be sleepwalking. This did not mean that Tang had any other thoughts. It was just that he thought that Josiah would definitely be unhappy if he mentioned it, so he subconsciously ignored it. After a while, Josiah frowned and analyzed. So, because of Bamitu's existence, you can't do anything to Miss Lan Sha. And she has no place to go now, so you can only bring her here to the Gray Coat Army? It's not all because of Bamitu. Tang touched his nose and hesitated. He spread his hands and said, "You know, Lan Sha saved me in the northern wilderness. Of course, I saved her too. But later in the northern wilderness, she was the one who kept me safe. Well, we can be considered friends. I really can't kill her. All right about Lan Sha. There's one more thing I have to confess. But honey, don't misunderstand. This is just my guess. She seems to have some feelings for me. When I came here, I was conflicted. I wanted to reject her, but I wasn't sure. Maybe I was just thinking too much. Idiot. How is this a good impression? She's clearly coming for you." "No, she's coming for me." Josiah pursed his lips. He was a little unhappy, but then the corners of his mouth curled up. If Tang could say that to her, it meant that Tang really didn't have any thoughts of having a change of heart. This made Josiah very happy. The gloominess from dinner was instantly swept away. So what if you like Tang in? No matter how much you like him, it's useless because he's mine, Josiah's, after all. Josiah quickly made a decision. She decided not to tell Tang about her discovery for the time being because she thought that this was a battle that belonged to her. Since you want to fight, then I'll make you lose wholeheartedly. In terms of confidence, Lan Sha was proud, but how could she, Josiah, lose to him in the slightest? Looking at Josiah, whose expression was constantly changing and who didn't speak for a long time, Tang came closer and carefully probed. "Are you angry?" I said, "Don't misunderstand. There's really nothing between me and her. How about, regardless of whether it's wishful thinking or not, I'll righteously reject her tomorrow?" Josiah waved his hand generously. "No, I think Miss Lan Sha doesn't have such thoughts. You're embarrassing her." "Oh, so you're not angry?" "Angry, of course I'm angry." Josiah glanced at Tang who cupped his hands and begged for forgiveness, and nodded reservedly. "But, seeing that your performance is not bad, I'll let this matter go for now." "Phew! Please don't pause when you speak next time. Who did you learn this stupid habit from?" "I learned it from someone just now." "Who is that someone? Come out. See if I don't beat him up." After chatting for a while, it was almost the wee hours of the morning, and the after effects of drunkenness also came. However, as mentioned before, of course, Tang couldn't stay here for the night. So they said goodbye and sent Tang out of the curtained door. Josiah thought for a while and suddenly said, "Tang, let's get married." "Good night, Tang," and suddenly reacted and was stunned on the spot. Then he looked at Josiah's face seriously and smiled, revealing 2 rows of white teeth. "Okay, when?" Josiah didn't smile. On the contrary, he frowned and poked Tang in the air. "You hesitated just now. You're not sincere." "Damn." Reaching out to touch his forehead, Tang looked like he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "Please, such a big thing. Anyone would be stunned for a second or two." "I don't care. Anyway, you hesitated. Of course, this was just an excuse and a joke. Josiah was just provoked by Lan Sha tonight, so he made this fuss." "Okay, then let's do it without hesitation." Without arguing, Tang shrugged, took a step back, and knelt on one knee. This time, it was Josiah's turn to be stunned. He instantly realized something. At first, he was full of shame, but then he also didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just as he was about to reach out and pull Tang up, his eyes swept over something, and he was suddenly stunned. He was so anxious that he spoke incoherently. "Tang, get up." In front of Josiah, more than 10 feet behind Tang, a group of patrolling soldiers had just walked out of the corner of the tent. They turned their heads subconsciously and stopped, instantly dumbfounded. In the middle of the night, a man and a woman, the man kneeling in front of the woman. So, other than proposing, no other thoughts hovered in everyone's mind. And marriage, for the current Josiah, was undoubtedly impossible. This wasn't to say that Josiah didn't like Tang. In fact, if Josiah wasn't the leader of the Gray Coat Army, and it wasn't wartime now, she might have already hinted at Tang. But now it was really impossible. The reason was simple, just like what a general in the modern world said. The Xiongnu had not been exterminated, so how could he have a family? Now, the Gray Coat Army was at a critical moment. Although it seemed that they were extremely powerful and had occupied a lot of territory, in reality, it was like walking on the edge of a knife. The slightest carelessness would result in the complete annihilation of the entire army. Right now, although they had just escaped from the tiger's mouth, they hadn't charged out from the wolf's pack. The Blank's army was still eyeing them covetously. At this time, as the leader, if Josiah held a wedding, what would the soldiers and generals think? What would the martyrs who had died on the battlefield think? In fact, wasn't Losha the same way before? Although Zwafan was a little slow, he had hidden his love for decades, but didn't say it out loud. But the shrewd Losha naturally knew, but he still didn't say it out loud. It was also because of this that the future of the Gray Coat Army was uncertain, and, as the leader, he had no choice. But at this time, Tang had already said it. It was very loud and cadenced, as if he was afraid that others couldn't hear him. Leader Josiah, please don't worry. This subordinate will definitely complete this mission. No, Josiah was stunned, but the patrolling guards more than 10 feet away suddenly understood. They all slapped their heads, probably blaming themselves for thinking too much. What kind of joke is this? Have you forgotten who you learned the ability to breathe heavily from? Is the ability to be observant and alert? Getting up, Tang winked mischievously, held back his laughter, and bowed. Good night, leader. After saying that, he walked past the stunned patrolling guards with his head held high. That's right, it was that cool. In the wee hours of the morning, the bright moon hung high in the sky. The encampment was silent. Even Fry, David, and the others who had said that they wouldn't go home until they were drunk were already asleep. However, Tang and Josiah weren't the only ones who hadn't fallen asleep yet. Somewhere in the encampment, in Lan Shah's tent. Didn't go well? When Bamitu appeared with bags of clothes, makeup, and other things, he saw Lan Shah holding his chin and leaning on the wooden table. He was in a daze and didn't move for a long time. He instantly realized something. Yes, I underestimated my opponent. In the end, not only did I not gain any advantage, but I also embarrassed myself. After stretching, Lan Shah got up and took the things. He smiled sweetly. Grandpa Bamitu, you've worked hard. It must be very long and tiring to go back and forth. He waved his hand. It's not far. Previously, I thought that this was a battlefield and that I had to go to the cities in the hinterland of Bran to find shops. I didn't expect that although the cities occupied by the Gray Coat Army were controlled, there weren't many changes in the city. The shops were still operating as usual. This Gray Coat Army does have some tricks up their sleeves. You said that they have tricks up their sleeves. Then this leader Josiah will naturally be more difficult to deal with. Why? Did she find out your intentions? Lan Shah rubbed his eyebrows. Not only that, she even counterattacked. Every word she said hit me in the heart. If it wasn't for a smart guy in the end, who knows what the result would be? But she didn't have it easy either. When she left, she almost didn't want to send someone to send me back. Bamita frowned. If she knows your intentions, will she tell that silly boy and let him come forward? Don't worry, she won't. Lan Shah didn't even think about it, and simply waved his hand to deny it. He smiled. At most, Tang knows that I have a good impression of him. If she told him, it would be troublesome. Of course, this isn't the main point, nor is it the fundamental solution to the problem. If she wanted to quit completely, she has to defeat me and make me accept my defeat wholeheartedly. What kind of logic is this? A woman's logic. Haha, Grandpa Bamitu, don't think about it. You men don't understand. Well, it's really interesting. I just came to the Gray Coat Army on the spur of the moment, and I actually found a good opponent. Josiah. He deserves my full effort. Chapter 10:10. Since he said he would go all out, the first thing he had to do was to understand his opponent. Lan Shah, who was familiar with military affairs, naturally understood the principle of knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy. So, early the next morning, before the morning fog dissipated, Lan Shah began to observe the Greycoat Army's encampment. Yes, accompanied by Tang In. Don't misunderstand, Tang In didn't want to. At this time, he was still hungover. Every few steps he took, he had to rub his dry eyes twice and pinch the space between his eyebrows 3 times to wake himself up. The splitting headache was painful. But what could he do when the excited Lan Shah wanted to come out for a stroll? He couldn't follow her. Most people in the Greycoat Army didn't know her. It would be hard to say if something went wrong. He let others follow her. He was afraid that she would trick them into revealing the Greycoat Army's secrets. He was also worried that he would accidentally annoy her. If Bamatu fell from the sky, then it would be a lot of fun. But if he followed her personally, Lan Shah was obviously wandering around aimlessly. Like a curious baby, she would point and ask where this place was and what it was for. She would also look at the patrolling soldiers and praise them insincerely for their professionalism. Fortunately, Tang In was with her. Otherwise, based on her pointing and gossiping behavior, she might have been arrested by the guards as a spy. After what should be the 14th yawn, Tang In couldn't stand it anymore. I say, what are you planning? Just tell me your purpose. If I could take you there, I'll definitely take you there. If I can't take you there, let's go home. It's not too late to go back to sleep now. I don't have a purpose. Can I just stroll around? Lan Shah spread his hands and looked innocent. Tang In frowned and rubbed his chin. I see. Then you know that I feel bad when I wake up with a hangover, so you did it on purpose? Lan Shah was stunned, then shook her head and chuckled. All right, since you insist on my purpose. Well, I'm interested in one of the weapons in your hands. It's the one Z used to blast open the Imperial City in the northern wilderness. It's like a miniature version of Mjolnir. Can you? Tang In simply waved his hand and interrupted. You'd better just walk around. What kind of joke was this? Even if Tang In didn't know anything about military affairs, he knew that trump cards like the purple bore cannon were military secrets that absolutely couldn't be leaked. Lan Shah obviously knew this as well. He shrugged his shoulders, indicating that it wasn't his fault, and continued to stroll around the base. After a few steps, she raised her eyebrows and pointed to a rather lively corner of the encampment. What's that place? Tang In looked over and saw a large area of gray and white tents set up one after another. From time to time, he could see people lifting the curtains and hurrying in and out. Sometimes they were carrying people in, and sometimes they were carrying people out. Not far away, the side of the mountain spring was even more lively. Layers upon layers of silhouettes surrounded the spring. They were either standing or sitting, holding wooden basins in their hands. They seemed to be washing something, and faint laughter could be heard. Oh, it's the casualty barracks. There are women in the barracks? TSK, what are you saying? As if you weren't in the barracks before, or you weren't a woman. Looking at Lan Shah's reproachful gaze, Tang In spread his hands. I know what you mean, but the Greycoat Army is different. The soldiers here are also different from the Brand soldiers and the Northern Wilderness warriors under your command. What you're worried about won't happen here. For example, regardless of whether it's a man or a woman, will they lay their hands on their brothers and sisters? Even rabbits don't eat the grass near their burrows. Of course, if it's just a normal relationship, we won't object. You won't object. Can this guarantee the soldiers' combat effectiveness? Why not? Tang In asked back. As long as they can figure out why they pick up weapons and fight. Lan Shah was slightly startled, but he instantly understood. He nodded and looked a little emotional. Such a group of soldiers. No wonder they can do what even the regular Brand soldiers can't do. They can fight against the warriors of my tribe and not be at a disadvantage. It wasn't difficult to understand. Just think about why the Brand soldiers and the warriors of the Northern Wilderness fought. It was easy to understand why the soldiers of the Greycoat Army could do this. Generally speaking, the word ideal was always vague. For most people, it wasn't as practical and attractive as money, food, military achievements, and so on. But no one could deny that the word ideal did have a magic power to make people who had not yet calmed down feel their blood boil. And some seemingly inconceivable miracles were also born because of this. Coincidentally, the soldiers and civilians of the Gray Coat Army were a group of people who had not yet calmed down. Therefore, they survived many hardships and didn't die. They were besieged but didn't perish. Even in field battles with the barbarian army, which had the best individual combat ability on the continent, they could still win and lose. Is this a compliment? Of course. Lan Sha nodded without hesitation. Then he shook his head. But I wouldn't dare to lead such soldiers, because their goal is very simple and complicated. It's not as simple and direct as the stimulation of money and power. Tang Yin thought for a moment and nodded in acknowledgement. However, he still smiled and said, "It's not bad." He thought for a moment and said, "You might not know, but the Gray Coat Army's speed of recruiting troops is very fast. I know very well that 2 years ago, the Gray Coat Army's number of soldiers was less than 30,000. But now, it is estimated that there are at least 150,000 soldiers who can fight. Also, I know that the Gray Coat Army has an advantage that the tribes can't. That is, for every soldier you recruit, you actually weaken the brand's national strength, because they are all brand people." Lan Shao winked at Tang Yin, who was in a daze. He smiled and said, "I told you I have collected information on the Gray Coat Army, but it seems that you really don't know much about military affairs. It takes time for a recruit to grow into a veteran. Even if there are no accidents along the way, they need to be on the battlefield for at least half a year. Only then can they begin to develop the psychological quality of a true warrior. And those recruits who are trembling with their weapons can't be considered combat power. Because of their existence, they will weaken the combat power of our side." After a pause, Lan Sha continued, "Do you know how many veterans there are in a brand? No less than 1 million. So, no matter how fast you recruit troops, it will take at least 3 years to be able to fight. As for now, if you can perfectly unleash every bit of combat power, there's a 30% chance that you can take over the northern part of the brand." Only 30%? Tang Yin exhaled. He had to admit that Lan Sha's deduction was reasonable. "You think it's too little? You are too greedy." Lan Sha curled his lips. This 30% still requires a lot of luck to achieve. Of course, it also depends on the commanding ability of your army commander. "Commander?" Tang Yin smiled bitterly. The biggest shortcoming of the Gray Coat Army was that they did not have an outstanding commander. In fact, Fry was already very good. He had done the best he could, but he had wasted more than 10 years in a mine. He could only become a qualified commander now. There was still a long way to go before he could be outstanding. Of course, regarding the issue of the commander, Tang Yin only thought about it. He did not have any position. After all, Fry was already the most suitable candidate in the Gray Coat Army. If it were him, it would be impossible for him to pass, let alone pass after taking a deep breath. Tang Yin shook his head and stared at Lan Sha for a while. He looked hesitant. "You can be so detailed. Can I just give you a blow? Or, no way. Are you going to ask me for a solution? Haha, this problem can only be solved slowly with time. I can't do anything about it. Even if I know, I don't have the right to tell you, do I? Sir Ni Lao Hong." He said this strange name in a strange tone. Lan Sha chuckled and avoided Tang Yin's gaze. He waved his hand and ignored him. Tang Yin frowned. He felt that Lan Sha was implying something, but the other party obviously did not want to talk about it, so he naturally did not ask. At this time, Lan Sha noticed something and was surprised. "Huh, this is..." He raised his head in surprise and followed Lan Sha's line of sight. He saw that under the morning fog that had mostly dissipated, wooden carriages were being pushed to an open space and gathered there. Around them, soldiers were strapping horses onto the wooden carriages, appearing to be unusually busy. Before the 3 armies move, the provisions move first. Previously, they did not move under the heavy encirclement. As soon as you came back, you immediately broke out. "Haha, it seems that your lover is very worried about your safety." Tang Yin touched his nose. He vaguely remembered that Josiah seemed to have said something about breaking out as soon as possible last night, but he did not expect it to be so fast. Lan Sha was also watching silently. His eyes flashed under his glasses. The previous analysis of the Gray Coat Army situation was, of course, not a joke. She had thought of a method. It was a perfect way to anger Joshua and hurt Bran at the same time. It was a perfect way to kill two birds with one stone. Lon Shah's speculation was right. The strategy meeting in the Gray Coat Army's high-level tent had been going on for several days without any results. It was because Josiah and Fry were worried that acting rashly would harm Tang Yin, whose whereabouts were unknown. Now that Tang Yin had returned safely, the discussions that had been going on for several days should naturally have a result. In fact, when the high-level officials met yesterday afternoon, the improved strategy plan was brought out. Of course, this move also made the young generals and officers who competed to perform in the past few days feel at a loss. At this point, after a few days of rare peace in the Caesar continent, the tipping point finally appeared. After half a day of preparation, Blank's army was caught off guard. The Gray Coat Army brazenly broke through the encirclement and ignited the flames of war once again. The next few days were naturally continuous battles. Most of the Blank's army that surrounded them were reserve soldiers. Of course, their combat power was incomparable to the regular soldiers. They were old acquaintances with the Gray Coat Army. Both sides had fought for more than 1,000 miles before and knew each other very well. However, just as they had not fought before, there was naturally no miracle now. On the first day, the Gray Coat Army successfully broke through the encirclement before nightfall and once again took back the territory that they had previously lost. This did not mean that the Blank's army was useless. It was because the other side knew very well that if they fought a positional battle with the Gray Coat Army that had the purple bore cannons in hand, they would definitely lose. Therefore, they did not put up much resistance and surrendered the defensive line. Then, according to the previous strategy, the Madman's archers continued to harass the Gray Coat Army and carried out scattered guerrilla warfare. They did not fight the Gray Coat Army head-on at all. The consequence of this was that the Gray Coat Army was still expanding their territory, but their momentum was no longer as impressive as when they had just left the 100,000 mountains. They were invincible and powerful like tigers. It was as if they had instantly fallen from a flat official road into a muddy pond. They were still moving forward, but their speed had inevitably slowed down. If this continued, not to mention overthrowing the Bran Empire, occupying the northern part of the Bran would be a distant dream. And more importantly, this feeling was really disgusting. Looking at the Bran archers that had been circling around like flies, if possible, the Gray Coat Army would have killed them. But in reality, if they did not use the purple bore cannons, the Gray Coat Army soldiers who did not have cavalry could only watch. If they rushed out, they would not be able to catch up with the horses. If they did not rush out, they would have to worry about the occasional sneak attack from the enemy. Tang Yin looked at this scene and sighed with emotion. The guerrilla warfare tactics advocated by a certain great man in the modern world were indeed a universal truth of good advice. This was karma. Before the Gray Coat Army developed, the Blank's army felt about the Gray Coat Army that scattered and fled all year round. It was not that Fry and the others did not think of a way to deal with it, but whether it was an ambush or intimidation with the purple bore cannons, the effect was mediocre. Even if it was effective, the Bran soldiers were not fools. Basically, it would only be effective once, and it would not be effective again. Tang Yin also came up with a bad idea, such as tying up the captives of the Bran soldiers and walking outside. If there were any sneak attacks, they would be aimed at their own people. But in the end, Josiah and the others who did not know whether to laugh or cry directly rejected this idea. It was not that they were soft-hearted, but since the battle had been going on for so long, both sides had captives from the other side. Although it was true that the Bran soldiers had more captives, if they did this, wouldn't they be causing the deaths of their own people? In this difficult advance, the only good news for the Gray Coat Army was that they had ignited the flames of war and did not cause the overall situation to explode. The Bran army and the Barbarian army in the northern wilderness at the front line did not seem to have seen their actions. Those who were resting, and those who were repairing the walls were repairing the walls. It was peaceful and stable. Of course, Tang Yin and Josiah did not feel relieved. They had long expected such a situation to happen. Now, the supreme commander of the northern wilderness, Lan Shah, was living here. He ate and drank well, and when he had nothing to do, he would watch the battlefield and tease Tang in his free time. It was obvious that he was not going to leave. Therefore, the Northern Wilderness Army, without a commander, naturally would not move. And the frontline battle was led by the Northern Wilderness Army. As long as they did not move, the Blank's army would of course not dare to move. Finally, 5 days after the breakout, this stalemate was officially broken because of an unfriendly visit at noon in the temporary camp at the rear. "You're looking for me?" Josiah, who was sitting on a tree stump, put down the military report in his hand and looked up at Lan Shah, who was standing in front of him with a relaxed smile. He narrowed his eyes and said, "I don't think there's anything to talk about between us." He nodded. "I think so too." Tang En was not present, and there were no outsiders within a few meters of them. Lan Shah and Josiah naturally did not have to hide their true emotions and their disgust for each other. However, seeing that you guys are fighting in a disorderly manner, I decided to give you guys a chance to ask for my guidance. Well, consider it my hospitality fee for staying here for a few days. With just you? Josiah did not hide the contempt in his tone at all. With just me? Lan Shah raised his chin slightly and also did not hide the arrogance on his face. Let me introduce myself again. Standing in front of you is the Supreme Commander of the Northern Wilderness who personally commanded the army to defeat the 3 major corps of the brand at the front line, Lan Shah. Squeezing the report in his hand, Josiah narrowed his eyes and looked up at Lan Shah for a moment. He slowly said, "You have a way to deal with the archers of the brand?" "Of course." Pause for a while. Lan Shah smiled confidently. "At least, I'm much stronger than your current terrible commander. The terrible commander you mentioned once led the spearmen under his command at the front line more than 10 years ago. He repeatedly defeated your troops with fewer troops. Whenever he participated in a battle, he would always be the first to attack the enemy's camp. He was invincible." Lan Shah raised his eyebrows. "And then?" "Then he was framed by his colleagues. He left the battlefield and committed himself to a small mine. He did not see the light of day for more than 10 years. Slightly stunned, Lan Shah nodded. "Okay, I take back my terrible evaluation, but I'm still much stronger than him." Josiah did not refute. He frowned and said, "What's your purpose?" Lan Shah looked at the tree stump beside him and smiled without saying anything. Josiah was silent. There were faint, cheerful chirps of birds in the forest. Not far away, there were wisps of smoke rising. It was the logistics staff who were cooking. After a moment of silence, "Sit." "Haha, are you not confident in me? Or are you not confident in the combat power of your Gray Coat Army?" Josiah paused. She knew the combat power of the Gray Coat Army and compared it to the vast northern Brand territory, so she subconsciously thought that Lan Shah was boasting. But now, after hearing his analysis, after a moment of silence, she shook her head. "A few days ago, you said that the Gray Coat Army needs at least 3 years to develop before they can conquer the north of Bran." Lan Shah was stunned, then sneered. "Ha! He told you everything," Josiah smiled. "Of course, he's my husband. What's there to be proud of? I don't believe that bastard will tell you everything even if he kisses and touches me all over." Narrowing his eyes, Lan Shah waved his hand. "Yes, I did say that. But there's a difference between the two. If you continue fighting like this, you'll have to rely on luck for 3 years." Pause for a while. Lan Shah pointed at himself and raised his head proudly. "But if I lead the Gray Coat Army, this period can be greatly shortened. In fact, it won't even take a year." Boasting without strength was called boasting, but boasting with strength was called boasting. Although Josiah couldn't stand the arrogant look on Lan Shah's face, she couldn't help but ponder silently when she thought about how the other party had beaten the Brand's main army into a sorry state in just a few months. Then, she raised her head. "You haven't answered my question. What's your purpose for doing this?" "Purpose?" Lan Shah raised his eyebrows. "Tang En, you're joking." Josiah's expression didn't change. "Ha! If you agree, then this isn't a joke. Actually, if you think about it carefully, you should agree. Aren't you very worried about the Gray Coat Army's current situation? Now, the opportunity is right in front of you. As long as you sacrifice yourself, you can greatly improve the Gray Coat Army's current situation. You can also reduce the number of Gray Coat Army soldiers and citizens who will die. Yes, although it seems a little shameless to say this, it doesn't seem like a difficult choice to make based on your personality and ideals. Josiah couldn't help but pause when he heard this. He had to admit that although Lan Shah's analysis was shameless enough, from the perspective of Josiah's ideals, the benefits did indeed outweigh the disadvantages. He only needed to sacrifice his own happiness. His eyes were slightly dazed for a moment before they became clear again. Josiah took a small breath and frowned. Don't try to provoke me. Tell me your true purpose. Lan Shah spread his hands. But this is indeed what I want to achieve the most right now. Haha, it's a negotiation. Of course, you have to lay out your conditions. Don't reject me so directly. Seeing Josiah pick up the military intelligence report in his hand again, clearly looking like he was sending him off, Lan Shah smiled and shook his head. Now that the relationship between the Gray Coat Army and the Brand was like fire and water, the people in the Gray Coat Army didn't see themselves as part of the Brand. Therefore, there was no concept of treason. Josiah was conflicted about whether to agree to Lan Shah's suggestion. Logically speaking, he should seize this rare opportunity and cooperate with this powerful foreign aid. But emotionally speaking, this powerful identity was a love rival. Not only did he not chase his love rival away or find trouble with him, but he also had to cooperate with him. It was even very likely that he would have to watch the other party shine in front of him. It had to be said that this kind of mentality was extremely complicated. If he agreed, his love rival would be even more arrogant, and he would be even more of an eyesore. If he agreed, to a certain extent, he would admit that he was inferior to his love rival. If he didn't agree, he would be playing with the future of the Gray Coat Army and acting on impulse. If he didn't agree, he would be a sore loser. Of course, other than these problems caused by subjective consciousness, there are also some objective problems, such as how to appease Brother Fry and the others if he really agreed. Well, from this, it could be seen that Josiah was still rational. Although he was full of resentment towards Lan Shah, his mind had already begun to subconsciously consider the problem of how to deal with the aftermath after he agreed. Leader, Josiah subconsciously raised his head and looked at the figures standing in front of him bowing. He was stunned for a moment before he recognized that it was his personal guard captain, Victor. It's time to eat. Oh. Nodding, Josiah took a deep breath and seemed to have decided on something. He ordered, sent a message to the front line, asked General Fry and the others to stay where they are and wait for orders. Don't explain too much. Just say that I have a good idea to deal with the Brand's archers and want to give it a try. Ask them to be prepared. Yes. Josiah turned his head and looked at the smiling Lan Shah. He frowned. You haven't left yet? You should go now and prepare how to prove yourself. You only have one chance. TSK, the Brand who burns the bridge after crossing the river. Let's go, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, on an unknown highland hill. This location could be considered the center of the battlefield, so the members of the Gray Space who rushed over after receiving the news were all present, except for Monkey, who was still lying in the casualty barracks and teasing the young nurse. They scattered around, and it didn't take long for them to urgently set up a few well-defined defense lines. Although there weren't many people overall, if the Brand Scout team unluckily came over, only death would await them. Even if a Brand's army rushed over, they could still retreat calmly, even if they couldn't defeat them. Now, the Gray Space's prestige in the Gray Coat Army was definitely not the second best, especially when they protected Josiah's safety during the battle with the Brand's army. From a certain perspective, David's reputation had surpassed Hang On's in the past. Now that they could mobilize the entire Gray Space's team to protect them, there was no need to guess who was on this hill, on the top of the hill. Tang In looked at Josiah and Lan Shah with a stunned expression. His tone was full of disbelief. So, in the time it took me to go to the latrine, you decided to cooperate? Then, his expression darkened, and he looked at Josiah seriously. Wife, Are you sure that's the content of the cooperation? Why don't you think about it carefully and see if there are any oversights that you didn't pay attention to? He pointed at Lon Shah, who was curling his lips when he heard wife. Don't be fooled by her deceptive and weak appearance. She's really cunning. She might be scheming against you. And, Lon Shah was instantly enraged when he heard that. He went up and was about to kick Tang in. Josiah was still there, so Tang naturally couldn't mess around with Lon Shah. He quickly dodged and jumped away. Josiah, who was at the side with his arms crossed, raised his eyebrows when he heard that. Are you so confident that she can get rid of the brand's archers and reach the conditions of cooperation? Tang grinned. I don't know if she can get rid of the brand's archers, but I know that she once relied on only a dozen people to get rid of the encirclement of more than 10,000 rebels, and even killed them. Josiah was stunned when he heard that, but Lon Shah thought of that and couldn't help but laugh. He waved his hand. That can't be counted on me. Someone's ability to carve fake badges was the key to turning the situation around. The brand's archers have appeared. Listening to Lon Shah and Tang and talking about things that he didn't understand and seeing how familiar they were with each other, Josiah subconsciously felt a little irritated. He pointed at the scattered black dots that appeared in the distance and calmly interrupted. Lon Shah narrowed his eyes and forced himself to see the black dots clearly. The corner of his mouth curled up, and he instantly understood Josiah's thoughts. He didn't continue to tease them. He turned his head and looked at the gray coat army that had just entered the wilderness. There's no rush. Wait for the fish to bite the bait and taste the sweetness first. But we can make some preparations first. After he finished speaking, the three of them turned around together. Behind them, David and more than 10 people lined up in a row. There were layers of what looked like bamboo tubes piled up beside their feet, and there was even a lead wire exposed outside. This was one of the tools used in the other world to gather people and transmit orders remotely. It was a signal arrow. First, they marked the enemy, then let the two wings of the army spread out into several teams to pursue. Finally, they wait for the signal arrow command to move. Is he trying to completely mess up the battlefield so that he can fish in troubled waters? No, it's not like we haven't tried this method before. The north is vast, and there are many mountains. Take this wilderness as an example. Even if the soldiers spread out hand in hand, they can't fill half of this large open space. With such a huge space, it was simply a perfect racetrack. Every time our soldiers don't complete the encirclement, those bastards ride their horses and run away first. Do you think the leader is dissatisfied with the current speed of the army's advancement? She has never interfered with the command of the army before. Don't think too much. Maybe the leader really has a way. Didn't she say to wait for the signal arrow to move? Maybe the leader wants to personally command the scattered troops and successfully set up a trap. Damn, you are a general. Do you think commanding the army is as easy as waving a hand? I know the leader knows military command, but her level. Let's not talk about her level for the time being. Now there are at least a dozen scattered troops. If I let you lead the army, can you instantly see the overall situation, command a dozen regional battles at the same time, and give accurate instructions to all kinds of unexpected situations in a timely manner? Don't joke around. It's useless to let anyone lead the army, unless the god of war is reborn and is on our side. Chapter 10:12. Brand's archers harassed them as usual, while the gray coat army soldiers chased them crazily, which was out of the norm. Well, this was still the predetermined trajectory. After the initial shock, Brand's archers calmed down, and arrogant laughter rang out everywhere in the wilderness. Although the current situation of the gray coat army was different from the tortoise state that they had been in for the past few days, it was not as if Brand's archers had not been chased by the gray coat army before. It was obvious. 2 legs could not outrun 4 legs, and the killing range of a spear and a broadsword could never be compared to a longbow. Therefore, as long as they were careful not to be surrounded, or as long as they could successfully break out of the encirclement before it was surrounded, the mob behind them could only be teased. That was all. In fact, The situation at the beginning of the chase was progressing perfectly according to Bran's archer's plan. In the boundless wilderness, the dozen or so scattered gray-coat army squads seemed so small and insignificant, as if they were ants. Even though they were trying their best to pursue and surround the enemy, and their footprints almost covered the entire wilderness, their efforts seemed so clumsy and powerless in front of the archers who were nimble in turning and wantonly riding their horses. It should be said that in the current chaotic situation, it was a good idea to fish in troubled waters. However, it also depended on the strength of both sides. In fact, Bran's archers with war horses were obviously more suitable for such a battlefield than the gray-coat army soldiers, and it was easier for them to fish in troubled waters. Whoosh! The arrow whistled and accurately shot in the crowd, finally stabbing into the thigh of a gray-coat army soldier. Although the fatal arrow was blocked by the shield next to the injured soldier, Bran's archers still had a smile on their face as they retreated. They casually drew a line across their necks, making a gesture of death. Hide, hide, hide. Lowly people will always be lowly people. Oh, you missed. Occasionally, there will always be a bet, a month's pay, and we will compete on the number of people we kill. Since you insist on giving me money, then come at me. It's a deal. Watch my arrow. Hit. The atmosphere of the battlefield could not be any more relaxed. It could even be said that it was not a battlefield, but a hunting ground. In the eyes of the Bran archers, the gray-coat army soldiers who were chasing after them were like prey. Wild hares, wild deer, and the like, they didn't pose much of a threat. Of course, these provocative words and attitudes could also be seen as a strategy. They would provoke the anger of the prey behind them and provoke them to continue chasing. This way, they would be able to continuously harvest heads and accumulate battle merits. Wouldn't that be killing two birds with one stone? However, just when the two Bran archers were about to start a competition of numbers, suddenly, a muffled sound exploded in the sky. Subconsciously, they looked up and saw a green light exploding in the sky. The light disappeared, and then a large cloud of green smoke slowly dispersed. There seemed to be some kind of pattern, but because of the white background of the sky, they couldn't see it clearly. Signal arrow? They were all characters who had been on the battlefield for a long time. Naturally, they knew what the effect in front of them was and what it was used for. Bran's mounted archers were stunned when they saw this. They had a bad feeling about this. However, they quickly lowered their heads and looked around. There was no change in the battlefield. The scattered gray army was still chasing after them. There were no enemy soldiers coming from the periphery to surround them like a tidal wave. Everything was normal. Was it just to scare them? Just when the scattered thousands of Bran archers were confused, a gray-coat army team on the north side of the battlefield looked up at the green smoke in the sky. They couldn't help but slow down. It's green? Is it referring to us? Captain, it's green. How many times did it sound just now? 1. It must be 1. I've been paying attention. 1 east, 2 west, 3 south, 4 north. Quick, turn around, go to the east. The strange conversation was like a code. It was believed that no one other than them knew what it meant. No Bran archers noticed this scene. Of course, even if they did, they wouldn't care. After all, in such a chaotic battlefield, it was normal for a team to suddenly turn around and move forward. There was nothing to be concerned about. However, this signal arrow seemed to have officially opened the curtains of something. After a few breaths, the eye-catching green smoke in the sky was quickly blown away by the biting cold wind. Suddenly, bang, bang, 2 consecutive sounds were heard. A large yellow smoke exploded. Pause for a while. Bang, bang, bang. 3 more explosions sounded. This time, it was red smoke that spread out. Bang, 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 green, yellow, red, blue, purple. In a short while, the sky was like an impressionist canvas. All kinds of colors were used one after another. The scene was spectacular. Even though the place was bustling with activity, the Bran archers in the wilderness were bewildered. Out of their sharp instincts, they subconsciously sensed that something was amiss, but they couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. Perhaps only the person who sent the signal arrow in the sky and the slowly advancing middle army could feel that something was wrong. The difference was that the former was the mastermind, while the latter only knew a little about the method and was currently verifying it with their own eyes. It's here. When the first signal arrow exploded in the sky, Fry and the other senior generals in the Middle Army suddenly became spirited. They straightened their bodies and subconsciously looked at the battlefield from left or right. This serious action didn't mean that they were very confident in this operation. In fact, they weren't optimistic because they had failed many times before. But this time, Josiah was personally commanding, so they still had to give face to him. Green, 3rd Army Spearman Brigade. Over there. Yellow, 2nd Army Shieldman Brigade. Here. Red, 3rd Army Swordsman Brigade. They're all in that area. Fry and the others who knew that the scatter pursuit teams had been given color codes in advance, and they instantly found the corresponding teams. Corresponding to the color change in the sky, they only looked for a short while and were surprised to find that the teams of the colors were all in a small area. Frey's body suddenly trembled when he realized something. Before he could finish his sentence, the situation of the battle in that area suddenly changed. As the teams of the three colors seemed to advance and retreat in a seemingly random pattern, a small triangular cage quickly formed under everyone's eyes. More than 100 Bran archers who were tightly holding on to the reins and looking around blankly were locked in the middle of the cage. It was obvious that they didn't know when they were suddenly surrounded. There was no space for the warhorses to accelerate and charge, and there was no shooting range to maximize the advantage of the arrows. No matter how elite the archers were, they couldn't be compared to an inconspicuous infantry brigade. Not to mention, the fighting power of the gray coat army soldiers was very good, and now they were surrounded. There was no doubt that the moment the triangular cage was formed, the fate of more than 100 archers was sealed. Is it a coincidence? A high-ranking general of the gray coat army, Jian Zhang, was stunned and asked subconsciously, "It can't be. Is it really done under the command of the leader?" Fry and the others were silent. While they were in a daze, the signal arrows in the sky continued to explode. The pair of formless hands that had changed their trajectories were like daggers at the end of the road. Finally, at this moment, sharp-edge armor popped out. Without any pause, colors spread out one after another, rendering the monotonous and gloomy sky. In the wilderness below, more than a dozen pursuit teams showed no signs of dispersal. At this moment, they were like puppets being pulled by strings. They didn't even need to think. As long as they watched the signal arrows move in the sky and completely follow the orders, they would be able to fulfill their long-cherished wish and simply kill the annoying Bran archers who were like flies. Perhaps this strange scene could be best described as a high-ranking general of the Grey Coat Army subconsciously muttering, "This is commanding a battle like playing chess." It wasn't that there was no resistance. At this moment, more than 1,000 Bran archers were carrying out a pure harassment tactic. This tactic was very random and flexible, so the archers themselves had a high degree of freedom. Therefore, the so-called Supreme Commander was actually the captain of each archer troop. The moment the first archer squad was surrounded, the remaining archer squad captains realized that something was amiss. Without much hesitation, they quickly reacted. After all, there was no time for hesitation on the battlefield. The Bran archers who were closer to the enemy came to the rescue, while those who were further away delayed the troops in front of them. There was also a group of archers who directly changed direction and rushed to the periphery of the wilderness. Of course, they were not escaping, but rushing to the high hill where the signal arrows were fired. The Bran archers reacted quickly, but unfortunately, it was all in vain. It was as if they had been seen through by the figure behind the pair of invisible hands. Before they could rush to the triangular cage, they were blocked by a team diagonally from the side. Under such circumstances, it was naturally impossible to fight head-on. The archers immediately turned their horses and tried to go around, but in the end, they were still blocked by the Grey Coat Army, who followed the instructions of the colors. They changed direction again, but it was still the same. They changed direction again. Well, they had no room to change direction again, because they, who came to the rescue, were also locked in the center of the triangular cage. The other Bran archers who tried to delay or capture the king were also in a similar situation. The only difference was that they were only blocked, but not surrounded. However, the situation had developed to this point. Even the stupidest person knew that they had been tricked. Soon, the Bran archers who saw that the situation was not good turned their horses to the periphery. This time, they really wanted to escape. But it was also a pity that the opportunity was always fleeting. Although they were already deep in the wilderness, if they had immediately chosen to break out when the first signal arrow exploded, they might have been able to escape with the advantage of their horses. But because they did not pay attention to it, when they reacted, the layout of the battlefield had already been formed. It was a hopeless situation. Fry and the others in the Middle Army, who were not involved in the matter, saw it the clearest and were also the most shocked. Those large groups of gray-coat army soldiers who were constantly moving were like moving high walls. They directly divided the seemingly vast wilderness into small areas, completely blocking the possibility of the Bran archers who were deep in the middle of it to break out. Not only that, there was also something that Fry and the others did not notice. That was, if one looked down from above, the Middle Army they were in was the largest wall that separated the wilderness. Everything was under control. Everything was used. If one were to make an analogy, this vast wilderness was a chessboard. The Bran archers and more than 10 gray-coat army teams, including the Middle Army, were all chess pieces. As for the chess player, there was only one side and only one person. This was not bullying the other side because they did not have any chess players, but because no one in the other side's camp was qualified to be another chess player in the game. However, on the highlands and hills, the only chess player, Lan Shah, did not have the slightest sense of nervousness in the game. She raised her binoculars and looked around. She casually reported various numbers. She had the relaxed feeling of strategizing and destroying the enemy while chatting and laughing. It had to be said that Lan Shah's relaxed expression was not faked. She was really relaxed and carefree. One had to know that when she commanded the Northern Wilderness Army, no matter how small the battle was, it was not easy, because those simple-minded subordinates, she had to consider all factors and issue the most detailed and perfect military orders to ensure that the accidents would be minimized. Unlike the gray-coat army soldiers, who only needed a simple command to complete the task without question. As the commander, Lan Shah was very relaxed and satisfied. This was the principle of comparing people to each other will lead to death, and comparing goods to goods will lead to throwing them away. Since Lan Shah was relaxed, the people at the top of the mountain were naturally even more relaxed, looking away from the colorful sky. Tang shook his head and could not help but sigh. What the F Aster CK? It's really like Chinese New Year. Of course, the Chinese New Year here was not referring to the other world. On the Caesar continent, whether it was the Bran or the Northern Wilderness, there was no custom of fireworks and firecrackers during the festival. Only in the present world in Tangen's mind would there be such a lively scene. Looking behind him, the signal arrows at the feet of David and the others were constantly decreasing. There were not many left. Of course, this could not be a mistake in preparation. In fact, Lan Shah had considered all factors, including the approximate number of signal arrows. Nothing. I've used signal arrows to command this swordsman brigade a few times, but they didn't move. But when I used other signal arrows, they moved inexplicably. It's a mess. Lan Shah also frowned in confusion. I'm also a little confused. Logically speaking, they don't know my identity, and they don't know that I'm the commander of this battle. They shouldn't be obeying on the surface, but disobeying on the surface. You're saying that they don't listen to military orders? Josiah was stunned. This was indeed not her doing. Just as Lan Shah said, she couldn't joke about the lives of the gray-coat army soldiers on the battlefield. Tangen was also stunned when he heard this. There wasn't much scheming in the gray-coat army, especially for their leader, Josiah. Everyone in the gray-coat army respected him. It was impossible for there to be a situation where they disobeyed orders. You don't believe me? Then I'll show you. Shrugging, Lan Shah waved his hand behind him. 7-2. The so-called 7 referred to the 7th gray space member from left to right. As for 2, it referred to the 2 signal arrows that were lit. Soon, the 2 signal arrows exploded in the air, shining with bright purple light. As expected, the swordsman brigade that was supposed to move to the west was still standing in the same place, without any movement. Lan Shah spread his hands, indicating that this was the situation. Josiah's face suddenly darkened, and he was also a little confused. She didn't know what had happened, because this was the first time she encountered a situation where they didn't even listen to her orders after she became the leader of the Gray Coat Army. On the other hand, Tang In seemed to have thought of something, and his expression suddenly became a little strange. Well, do you remember what color signal arrow was used before? This swordsman brigade moved randomly? Lan Shah thought for a moment and said, "It should be blue." "Why?" "Send it again, under the premise that it doesn't affect the original blue team." Lan Shah didn't understand when he heard this, but he still picked up the binoculars to observe and said, 9-3. Bang, bang, bang. 3 blue lights exploded in the air. Immediately, under the stunned and enlightened gazes of the 3 people, the blue and purple teams moved at the same time, quickly moving towards the south. Looking at Josiah and Lan Shah's confused gaze, Tang In sighed softly and spread his hands helplessly. "Don't you know what color blindness is?" Chapter 10:13. Color blindness. All right, it was a blunder, but it was just a small problem. One team didn't listen to the command. It wouldn't affect Lan Shah's command, and it wouldn't affect the overall situation. After waiting for a while and confirming that the brand didn't send any reinforcements, Josiah sent a message to Fry and the others, telling them to meet him in the main tent after cleaning up the battlefield. They might as well leave the high hill immediately. As for the situation in the wilderness below, if they still couldn't eliminate the brand's archers, Fry and the others wouldn't be able to survive. After returning to the rear, Tang In and the others didn't go anywhere. They just waited in the main tent. Previously, it was said that eliminating the brand's archers was only a prerequisite for the cooperation. At most, it would prove Lan Shah's strength. Other aspects didn't have much meaning. The important thing was the next step. Lan Shah was going to command the Gray Coat Army, so Marshal Frey's position would naturally be awkward. In addition, how to make the middle and high-ranking officers obey Lan Shah's command was also a very realistic problem. If Josiah came forward to persuade them, the resistance would naturally be much lower. But the key was that she couldn't come forward. Not to mention her deep friendship with Fry and the others. She was the leader. If she invited an outsider to command her troops, and this outsider's identity was the commander of the Northern Wilderness. Once this was exposed, it would be hard to explain. Since she couldn't use her connections, the only solution was to make things clear. Lan Shah came forward and directly used strategy and tactics to suppress Fry and the others. It was simple and direct. This way, she could establish her prestige in the shortest time possible and wouldn't drag Josiah into the awkward situation. It was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. In this way, there was only one problem left, and that was whether Lan Shah could suppress Fry and the others. Well, to Tang In, who knew Lan Shah's way of thinking, well, this wasn't a problem at all. In the main tent, Tang In and the others were casually chatting while Victor led people to set up the tactical deduction sand table. If they wanted to determine who was superior in terms of military strength, it was naturally impossible to talk about strategy on paper. The best way to do this was to use actual battle results to speak for themselves. However, this method was undoubtedly not suitable for the current situation. Lan Shah's identity had to be kept a secret, so naturally, her valiant battle results of defeating the brand's 3 main legions could not be made public. Fortunately, the Otherworld army also had something like a tactical simulation sand table. Although it was still not an actual battle, it was undoubtedly able to reflect some of the commander's combat standards. Can you do it or not? Don't pretend too much. Don't cry when you lose. Looking at the relaxed Lan Shah, Tang In teased. Of course, this was just a joke, and it was the kind of joke that had no substance. But what could Tang In do? Josiah and Lan Shah obviously didn't get along well. Sitting together, they had no desire to chat at all. In order to avoid awkward silence, he had to put in a lot of effort. Lan Shah smiled gently and put down the teacup in his hand like a general. Instead of worrying about me, why don't you think about how to end this later? I've already made it clear that in order to achieve the best results, I won't hold back later. Oomph. Josiah, who was sitting on the side, couldn't help but snort softly. Although he had generally acknowledged that Lan Shah's combat standards were indeed superb, it was still very jarring to hear him looking down on the generals here. Tang didn't have these complicated thoughts. Hearing Lan Shah's words, he simply waved his hand and said, "Use whatever means you have. As long as you can win, Brother Fry and the others are not sore losers." "That's good." Nodding, Lan Shah looked around the space in the tent as if he was roughly estimating. Then, he smiled at Victor, who was standing next to the roughly arranged sand table, and said, "Sorry to trouble you. Please add 3 more sand tables. The terrain is arbitrary." Victor couldn't help but be stunned when he heard this. When he came back to his senses, he subconsciously looked at Josiah. The latter was frowning as he looked at Lan Shah. When he saw the other party's undisguised confidence, he paused for a moment, withdrew his gaze, and nodded lightly at Victor. Seeing this, Victor simply replied, "Okay, no problem. Go, get 3 more sand tables." As he watched Victor and the others get busy again, Tang couldn't help but grin. He thought to himself, since they're so arrogant, they really don't intend to hold back. That was right. Tang, who had roughly guessed Lan Shah's actions later, was still full of confidence in Lan Shah. To a certain extent, Tang and Lan Shah were the same kind of people. They were both intelligent and good at control. The difference was that Tang was good at precise control over a small area, which made him suitable for assassins. Lan Shah, on the other hand, had perfect control over big strategies, which made him the commander-in-chief. However, no matter what they were good at, there was one thing they had in common. Since they said it out loud, they must have absolute confidence. This was also a kind of control over one's thoughts. Just like a swindler, when he knew everyone's trump cards, he naturally didn't care how big the game was. Because, anyway, there was no doubt that he would win. Not long after a total of 4 large and small deduction sand tables were set up, there was suddenly a burst of cheers outside the tent. Obviously, Fry and the others who returned triumphantly had arrived. The tent curtain was lifted, and they laughed heartily. "Haha, leader, your finger-waving tactics are amazing. Brand's archers were all wiped out, and we seized more than 600 warhorses. Haha, it's enough to build a cavalry brigade that belongs to us. I'm ashamed. Leaders' commanding skills really make us ashamed. Yes, even if the god of war was alive, he wouldn't be as good as this." Fry and the others walked into the tent one after another, and each of them had a happy look on their faces. What followed was an earth-shattering amount of praise, instantly causing the atmosphere in the large tent, which was previously cold and cheerless, to become lively and bustling. In stark contrast, the people in the tent were all silent. Tang had a strange expression, Josiah was expressionless, and Lan Shah smiled with squinted eyes. For a moment, the atmosphere was very strange. Soon, Fry and the others noticed that something was wrong. They looked back and forth between Josiah and Tang and occasionally looked at Lan Shah, trying to find something from them. Gradually, as more and more people came to their senses, the lively atmosphere gradually cooled down. Finally, with 2 light coughs, Tang stood up under Frey's inquisitive gaze. Logically speaking, although Tang's true identity had been known and accepted by most of the people in the tent, Josiah should be the first to appear on this occasion instead of him. However, it was not suitable for Josiah to appear now, so he could only be the bad guy. He glanced at the confused people in the tent and said, "Everyone here is a high-level member of the Gray Coat Army and the senior generals of various armies. You're also the main pillars of the Gray Coat Army, so there's no need to hide some things from everyone. Well, let me formally introduce a friend to everyone." He pointed at Lan Shah, who was chuckling. Lan Shah, my friend, and also the commander of this plan to eliminate the Bran archers. As soon as he finished speaking, there was an uproar in the tent. Her? How could it be? Isn't she the leader? Amidst the confusion, those who reacted quickly immediately understood the reason for the strange atmosphere just now. Just now, they held a preconceived notion and threw a lot of praise at their leader, Josiah, but they did not expect the real person to be sitting next to them. They suddenly felt a little awkward. Tang pressed his palms together and gave Fry an apologetic look. He continued, "You don't have to doubt the authenticity of my words. David and the others were also at the scene and can testify. This friend of mine, well, how should I put it, is undoubtedly top-notch in terms of strategic and tactical skills. Everyone saw the scene of her leading the plan to eliminate the Bran archers just now." Hearing this, Fry could not help but be stunned. When he connected it with the apologetic look from Tang in just now, he vaguely understood something. At this time, Tang was still speaking, so I propose that she and Brother Fry temporarily cooperate to command the army together. What? Are you kidding me? What does Elder Nero mean by that? As expected, there was an uproar in the tent. All kinds of doubts and disbelief instantly came crashing down like a storm. In name, the Greycoat Army did not have a real commander until now. However, the title of Marshal Fry had already been deeply rooted in people's hearts. Coupled with his long experience as a commander, Frey's prestige actually covered the entire army. Now that they heard that Tang suddenly inserted someone into the army and that she was on an equal footing with Fry, the senior generals were naturally dissatisfied. Now, the first to stand up and question were the senior generals and officers in the army. As for the others who did not immediately express their stance, but secretly looked at the silent Josiah behind them, they were observing. They probably thought about the cliched power struggle between factions. I knew it would be like this. Tang sighed and shook his head slightly. In fact, it was not that he could not inform Fry first. He believed that with his friendship with Fry, the latter would not have any objections. But it was precisely because of this relationship that in order to prevent everyone from thinking that Lan Shah got to the position through the back door, and in order for Lan Shah to suppress the generals to the greatest extent and achieve the best commanding effect after getting to the position, he could only hide it from Fry for the time being. Tang believed that Fry would not have any misunderstandings, and in fact, this was the case. Now, whether it was Fry or Frey's group of old brothers, although they were also stunned, they did not take the lead to stand up and say anything. They just quietly looked at Tang waiting for his explanation. However, what followed was not Tang's explanation, but a calm voice. "You seem very dissatisfied?" There was suddenly silence in the tent. This was not a provocation, and there was no trace of mockery in the calm voice. There was only doubt and incomprehension. And it was precisely because of this doubt and incomprehension that when it entered everyone's ears, they suddenly felt an indescribable strong sense of provocation, which was extremely harsh to the ears. Tang was also stunned when he heard this. He turned to look at Lan Shah, who stood up calmly and opened his mouth. "You're not playing by the rules. That's right, this was not a pre-planned process. The normal process should be for Tang to step forward and defend the people, and then take the opportunity to draw out the sand table duel and let Lan Shah and the dissatisfied generals deduce the battle. This was the best way at the moment. In fact, whether it was Tang or Josiah, who had been silent all this time, it was impossible for them to really stay out of the matter. They were here, to a certain extent, to represent and support something. It was just that some words would hurt feelings and offend people. Fortunately, Tang did not care. He was not the leader of the Greycoat Army, so he did not have to worry about the consequences. Moreover, many people present knew his identity. To put it bluntly, they also knew of his fierce reputation. Therefore, whether it was because of friendship or because of fear, they would more or less give him some face, so it was very good for him to step forward and suppress the situation. However, now that Lan Shah suddenly made such a scene, the situation was completely different. The pressure would shift from Twain's head to her, an outsider who was not welcomed in the first place. Actually, I think you guys are quite funny. As if feeling that the atmosphere in the field was not dead and oppressive enough, Lan Sha calmly continued to draw hatred. We are just cooperating with the commander-in-chief, and it's only temporary. It's not like I'm going to snatch the commander-in-chief position and lead you guys. Speaking of which, are you sure you are qualified to be led by me? These words were a bit hurtful. Tangan was speechless when he heard this. He sighed. What are you trying to do? Don't you think the matter is not big enough? On the other hand, Josiah at the side seemed to understand something. He looked at Lan Sha, and his eyes flickered slightly. She was protecting him just like that. F***CKU, shut up. A middle-level officer with an ashen face was about to stand up and curse, but he was slapped back by a palm. It was Shou Ho, who was also an old brother of Frey's who squatted in the mine with him. He looked at Lan Sha expressionlessly. Whether we are qualified to be led by you or not, but are you sure you are qualified to lead us? Shou Ho and the others were close friends with Tang Yin. After experiencing life and death situations several times, they knew that Tang Yin would not cheat them. However, this did not mean that they did not have any opinions in their hearts, especially when this matter involved Fry. Therefore, when they saw that the focus had shifted from Tang Yin to Lan Sha, they naturally had to stand up and ask for an explanation. Isn't it obvious? Lan Sha spread his hands indifferently. Before I came, a mere 1,000 Bran archers had already put you in a terrible situation. There was nothing you could do. Shou Ho was stunned when he heard this. Lan Sha looked around the field and shook his head. I'm not saying this to target anyone, and it's not that I want the position of commander-in-chief. It's that your command is really terrible, and you've wasted the combat potential of your soldiers. Pause for a while, he continued. By the way, I've seen the strategic plan that you made not long ago. How should I put it? It's demeaning to say that it's a mess, but it's definitely not outstanding. Well, it's average, barely passable. Pfft, it's just a lucky victory. How can you be so arrogant? In the crowd, a disdainful whisper floated out of nowhere. Tang Yin glanced around and immediately found the officer who spoke, but he did not stop him. Instead, he secretly sighed and could not help but praise the other party. Wasn't this just a supporting character? As expected. Well said. Lan Sha smiled slightly and nodded. It's just an insignificant victory in a small battle. It's indeed not worth bragging about, but we can't rule out the possibility of luck. Hearing this, everyone's face twitched to different degrees. This was a blatant mockery. The insignificant small battle that others spoke of was indeed an unsolvable problem that had troubled them for months. Waving his hand and pointing to the 4 sand tables in the corner of the tent, Lan Sha narrowed his eyes and smiled. Since that's the case, then let's make an actual combat deduction. Anyone who wants to exchange pointers can fight with me on the sand table. If you lose, then don't complain like a resentful woman. And the problem of me winning by luck doesn't exist. What if you lose? Ha! Chuckling twice, Lan Sha did not respond. Instead, he called Victor and a few other guards to come over and distribute the triangular flags that represented the number of different types of soldiers. F***CK, too arrogant. Lan Sha's disdainful response instantly angered the generals in the field. They rubbed their fists and were ready to go up and teach her a lesson. They could not wait to immediately beat her up on the sand table and make her eat her previous arrogant words. Of course, no matter where it was, there was a problem of qualifications. Even if the generals wanted to immediately teach Lan Sha a lesson, they had to wait for their superiors to express their opinion. The one who attracted the most attention was undoubtedly Fry, not only because of his identity as a quasi-marshal, but also because the other party was targeting him. Skinny Monk-alike and the others urged him on the side, clearly hoping that he would accept the challenge. Frey's expression was a little hesitant. He thought about more questions. It was not that he suspected that Tang Yin and Josiah deliberately tricked him, but he was thinking about the nature of this sand table deduction and whether Tang Yin and Josiah had any deeper considerations. He subconsciously looked at Tang Yin, but what could Tang Yin say? He could not say not to think too much, because no matter what he thought, he was going to lose. In the end, he could only shrug and spread his hands, indicating that they could do as they pleased. Just as the generals were urging Fry to accept the challenge, Lan Shah, who had walked to the sand table, looked over and waved his hand casually. Don't waste time with the selection. There are 4 sand tables here. As long as anyone is not convinced, one by one, come meet together. Damn, you really did that. Looking at Fry and the other generals whose expressions instantly stiffened, Tang couldn't help but reach out and touch his forehead. He shook his head and walked out of the tent with his head lowered, as if he couldn't bear to look at it directly. In fact, Tang's mentality now was that he couldn't bear to look at it directly. He had a headache about how to deal with it later. F***CK. After such a cruel blow, the morale of the Gray Coat Army should be at the bottom of the valley for at least 3 days, right? Walking out of the tent, Tang shook his head speechlessly again when he heard the angry clamor of the crowd behind him. They were all a bunch of pitiful people. He sighed as he walked out of the tent of the Central Army. He looked around and waved at the empty space. Is Elderba here? Why are you looking for me? Of course, Elderba was here. Or rather, even if he wasn't here, as long as Tang deliberately released his aura, Elderba would be able to arrive in an instant after sensing it. Looking at Bamitu, who stepped out of the void in front of him, Tang smiled and pointed behind him. He moved closer. You should know what Lan Shah is preparing to do, right? Of course. You also agreed? Bamitu nodded matter-of-factly. I'm just staying here. There's an opportunity to not waste a single soldier or food, and I can take back the territory that originally belonged to my tribe. Why wouldn't I agree? I see. Nodding in understanding, Tang rubbed his hands and grinned. Then, are you ready to fight the sword god Wu Ding with me? Chapter 10:14. Are you prepared to face the god of swords? Wu Ding? Who? Bamitu was stunned when he heard this. He reacted and looked at Tang in surprise. Wu Ding, what does he have to do with this? Are you kidding me? We are now working together to attack the brand. Do you think Wu Ding, who is the brand's guardian, will attack us? Tang asked in return. Moreover, it was Wu Ding's idea to force me to assassinate Lan Shah. Do you think that Wu Ding would be so stupid as to not suspect all of this when he saw the Gray Coat Army suddenly act so abnormally? Bamitu was stunned. He obviously did not think of this. His expression suddenly turned ugly. Was it Wu Ding who sent you? Why didn't you say this? I didn't send him. I'm not Wu Ding's subordinate, and we're not working together. Moreover, why should I tell you? There's no need, is there? Tang looked calm. It was my own idea to assassinate Lan Shah. Of course, at that time, I didn't know that Lan Shah was the commander of the barbarians. At that time, the Northern Wilderness Army had already approached the Gray Coat Army's territory. They did not take a detour and attack directly. Wu Ding came to me with this excuse. Do you think I should assassinate and stop all of this? Bamitu was silent. This was the logic. Bamitu was angry before, because he felt that Tang had worked with the brand first and tricked them. But now, the real reason was that the Northern Wilderness Army, which was the army that Tiu belonged to, had attacked the Gray Coat Army first. This had caused all of this to happen later. Therefore, he naturally had no reason to be angry. Frowning, he said, So, you think that Wu Ding will notice that we are working with you? They'll definitely be suspicious. At the very least, they'll come over to take a look or send someone over. Tang shook his head. We can't hide this, can we? You know Lan Shah's ability as a commander, and the Gray Coat Army soldiers aren't weak either. The combined power of the two will definitely be more eye-catching than the previous Gray Coat Army. So, after a pause, Tang looked at Bamitu and continued to rub his hands with a smile. So Wu Ding will definitely come? After hearing what Tang was about to say, Bamitu's brows suddenly relaxed, and he shook his head. Actually, there's another way. I'll take Lan Shah and leave immediately. Haha, of course you can do that, but Tang's expression didn't change. He stared fixedly at Bamitu and chuckled. Are you willing to do that? In the battle more than 10 years ago, you lost to Wu Ding and retreated to the Northern Wilderness in a sorry state. More than 10 years later, you ran away without a fight. Haha, are you willing to do that? Bamitu's expression froze when he heard this. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Provocation doesn't work on me. I'm just stating an objective fact. It can't be considered provocation." Tang Yin shrugged casually and smiled. "And with your knowledge and experience, of course you know that you have to pay a price if you want to gain something. You want to take back your former territory with just one Lan Sha, without wasting a single soldier or grain. Isn't that too easy? Of course, I'm not saying this to belittle Lan Sha. In my opinion, she is indeed worth 100,000 elite troops. But you have to be reasonable. People die in war. Lan Sha, who represents 100,000 troops, won't be hurt at all, but the Grey Coat army under her command will definitely suffer a lot of casualties. Haha, compared to the results of the battle, this price isn't enough. What do you think?" Bamitu's face was expressionless. "So you want to add me in?" "Yes and no." Tang Yin smiled and said, "The point is, you just said that you want to take Lan Sha away. Do you think she'll agree?" Bamitu froze when he heard this. Of course she wouldn't agree. Bamitu knew Lan Sha's thoughts better than anyone else. He also knew that although she would consider all aspects before doing something, once she made up her mind, she would definitely not change her personality easily. And most importantly, looking at Tang Yin, Bamitu's mouth twitched, revealing a faint, bitter smile. With you here, how could she give up so easily? Of course, Tang Yin didn't know what Bamitu was thinking. He just saw Lan Sha's great fanfare and wanted to cooperate, and roughly guessed that she wouldn't change her mind easily. Now, looking at Bamitu's expression, he undoubtedly confirmed this guess. "You're hesitating. Why? Are you not optimistic about this cooperation? Or do you feel that the effort is not comparable to the reward? Or are you really afraid of Wu Ding? Ah, you try to goad me again." "And yes, this time." Tang Yin simply nodded in agreement, which made Bamitu slightly startled. He then laughed and shook his head. "You're honest now. Just now you said that you'll fight Wu Ding with me. Are you not afraid of him?" "I am," Tang Yin straightforwardly admitted. He shrugged. "I'm not at the same level as you and Wu Ding. If I get hit, I'm afraid that even my corpse will be hard to find. But so what? No matter if I'm afraid or not, what's going to come will come, right?" "Yes, what's going to come will come." Bamitu narrowed his eyes and looked at the distant southern sky. His low voice was a little emotional. The scene fell silent for a moment. One could faintly hear the clamor of the generals arguing in the central tent in the distance. In fact, even if Lan Sha didn't cooperate with the Grey Coat army, if the northern wilderness tribes wanted to completely destroy the brand, they would first have to move Wu Ding, the protector of the brand. From this point of view, what's going to come will indeed come. There was no way to avoid it. After a moment, Tang Yin raised his eyebrows. "So you're saying that you agree? Tell me about your plan first." After coming back to his senses, Bamitu didn't immediately express his opinion. Instead, he looked at Tang Yin with a faint smile. "As far as I know, the Grey Coat army doesn't have much of a background. You're the only one above the level of void. You're not thinking of just the two of us going to fight, are you?" "Why not? As far as I know, there are only 3 people in the Sword God clan, including Wu Ding. You can settle your grudge with Wu Ding on your own. I'm weak, so I won't get involved. I'll try my best to support you and not let others affect your grudge with Wu Ding." "Huh." Without waiting for Tang Yin to finish, Bamitu laughed and shook his head. "It seems that my evaluation just now was wrong. Is this your sincerity?" Tang Yin smiled in agreement and didn't answer. What he said just now was half true and half false. It was true that he supported him, but to say that he wouldn't get involved in the battle between Bamitu and Wu Ding was, of course, a joke. Tang Yin really didn't want to, but the key was whether Bamitu would let him go. "It seems that you still don't know enough about the situation. You said 2 things wrong just now." Bamitu raised his finger and smiled with narrowed eyes. "First, with your current strength, especially after breaking through at the farm, you're enough to be ranked among the top warriors on the continent. You're already a threat to me and Wu Ding, who are already half buried." This wasn't a lie. In fact, it could be seen from the change in Bamitu's attitude before and after. After breaking through at Tang Yin's farm, Bamitu no longer called him kid to his face. This wasn't snobbery, but a kind of respect for Tang Yin's current strength. "There's one more thing. You've underestimated Wu Ding. Bamitu sighed softly. The title of the strongest person on the continent was earned through fighting, not by him. Oh, Tang was naturally aware of the improvement of his strength, so he didn't care. However, he didn't understand the second point. Thinking of the scene when he fought with Wu Ding, he frowned and asked, "You seem to be a little afraid of Wu Ding. Not a little, but a lot. You haven't really fought with him, so you won't know how terrifying that sword is when it's in its peak state." Shaking his head slightly, Bamito seemed to have thought of something. There was some unconcealable fear and coldness on his face. Silence. To be honest, Tangen's impression of Wu Ding wasn't that much of a fear. Of course, this didn't mean that he looked down on Wu Ding. Tang wasn't qualified to do so. It was just because of the two fights. The first time, he successfully blocked Wu Ding's sword. The second time, he successfully assassinated Wu Ding right under his nose. It must be admitted that the two successful cases gave Tang a lot of confidence, and he vaguely had the idea of challenging him. However, looking at the attitude of Bamitu, who was also a peerless expert, Tang suddenly became alert. He thought that he needed to reevaluate the strength of this brandsword god. The atmosphere was a little dull, and the noise from the tent in the distance couldn't be heard. Something seemed to have happened there, and it was also silent. After a while, Bamitu took a slight breath, as if he had recovered from his memories. The aura of an expert suddenly rose. Don't think too much. It's useless to think too much. More than 10 years have passed, and I really want to see if I can block that sword again. I agree with your proposal. Tell me what to do when the time comes. Old friend, last time I was defeated by you, and I was grounded in the Imperial City for more than 10 years, concentrating on my cultivation. I hope this time I can bring you some surprises, and I also hope you won't let me down, that's right. Previously, Bamitu had rejected Tang with various excuses, but in fact, he was just hesitating. To put it bluntly, in the end, Bamitu couldn't resist the temptation to fight with Wu Ding again in his heart. Even if he knew that Tang was provoking him, even if he knew that this wasn't the best choice. But this was a martial artist, especially peerless martial artists at the level of Bamitu and Wu Ding. Hearing this, Tang subconsciously nodded in surprise. Before he could open his mouth to say anything, Bamitu waved his hand and disappeared directly. Slightly stunned, Tang collected his expression and turned around. He saw the curtain of the big tent in the distance open, and figures slowly walked out. It was the group of generals. Because it was a little far away, he couldn't see their facial expressions clearly, but he could see that their footsteps were a little unsteady without a doubt. This was a physical and mental blow, and it should be the most serious kind. What a sin! Shaking his head, Tang certainly wasn't surprised by this result. As he said before, he had absolute confidence in Lan Sha's military achievements. But the time of this lively duel was a little too short. If he guessed correctly, Lan Sha really didn't hold back. He should have crushed all the way. Rubbing his eyebrows, the previous headache came again. F***CK. How should he deal with the aftermath? While Tang was distressed, the most important person to deal with the aftermath had already walked over. It could be seen that his current mental state wasn't very good. Although his expression was still calm, the traces of mountains and rivers between his eyebrows had not yet calmed down. His clenched and relaxed palms also showed that his state of mind was in turmoil. "Haha, Brother Fry." Touching his nose, Tang smiled and went forward to greet him. He took the initiative to bow and apologize. "Well, I'll confess. I'll explain. This is indeed my fault. I apologize for not notifying you in advance. But don't misunderstand. The commander of the Gray Coat Army will always be you, Fry. Lan Sha is only here temporarily." What? Fry was about to say something, but after being interrupted by Tang he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He waved his hand in annoyance. A loss is a loss. There's nothing to say about not being as skilled as others. But aren't you directly slapping me in the face by saying this? Tang giggled foolishly. Fry took a deep breath and shook his head, but it's already a slap in the face. I don't know where you found her, but all the generals and officers here are here today. Some of them are convinced, and some of them are not, and they took turns to come up with ideas to deal with a little girl. In the end, Fry paused and smiled bitterly. He licked his lips and continued to shake his head, speechlessly. I felt a little strange when we wiped out Brand's archers. Although Joshua knows military command, he shouldn't have reached this level. Later, when I returned to the main tent and saw your expressions, I actually more or less understood. Well, this isn't your fault. What Lan Sha said was reasonable. Indeed, my ability as a commander is limited. I've already made several mistakes before. Brother Fry, he waved his hand. Let me finish. I'm not complaining. I'm telling the truth. You also know that ever since old Marshal Omeng was injured, the commander of the Gray Coat Army has always been a problem. I've tried my best. This is also the truth, but the gap is there. It's not something that I can make up for with hard work. To be honest, if it weren't for your constant support, and if it weren't for the fact that there really isn't a suitable candidate in the Gray Coat Army, I would have stepped down long ago. Now, it's rare that you found such an outstanding commander. After a pause, Fry thought of something. He frowned and looked at Tang An. By the way, what did you say just now? She's only temporarily the commander? Smacking his lips, Tang An had a ridiculous expression on his face. TSK, Brother Fry, you're really... I was about to be moved when I heard you say so much, but in the end, you revealed your foxtail so quickly. Are you considering that she's only temporarily the commander and can't threaten your position? F***CK. After being stunned for a moment, Fry understood and couldn't help but curse. He angrily slapped away Tang An's hand. Seriously, although Lan Sha is young, she's indeed the strongest commander I've ever seen. In terms of strategy, it's hard to say, but she's definitely top-notch in terms of tactical command. I think even old Marshal Omeng can't compare. Why can't our Gray Coat Army keep such a genius? Could it be? Tang An smiled and waved his hand. You're thinking too much. It's really not because of Brother Fry. Then why? Because the temple is small and can't accommodate the great Buddha. What temple? What Buddha? Oh, it's because the temple is small and can't accommodate the great Buddha. After thinking about it, Tang An changed the way he put it that was easier to understand. Fred was stunned when he heard this, and then he came to a realization. That's right. How could someone with such a strategic vision and skillful and experienced commanding tactics possibly appear out of thin air? Tang An, you have to tell me her true identity. A descendant of a general? Or from which military academy? Judging from her temperament, she doesn't seem to be from an ordinary background. What? Tang An looked at Fry with a faint smile. You're not satisfied? You want to get back at me? Fry smiled bitterly. Forget about getting back at me. That's asking for humiliation. Consider it as getting back some balance for everyone. You don't know the situation in the tent just now. It's so embarrassing. It was 1 against 4, 4 against 1, but they were easily defeated by the opponent. I think that the amount of cold sweat we've had in our entire lives is probably not as much as today. Compared to that young Lan Sha, our years of experience on the battlefield are simply worthless. If you don't give me a reasonable explanation today, I'm afraid that everyone won't be able to walk out of the psychological shadow in the next few days. After saying this, he pointed at Shou Ho and the other generals who stopped in the distance and looked at them with a solemn expression. She said before that she wouldn't hold back. Is it that serious? It can only be more serious than you think. Frey's face was solemn, and he said firmly, Tang An, you have to tell me today. We can afford to lose, but at least we have to know who we lost to. You don't have to be so serious. Well, her identity is indeed sensitive, but it's not a problem to only tell Brother Fry. Well, you really didn't lose unjustly. With that, Tang An glanced around and whispered something to Frey's shoulder. After a pause, he immediately exclaimed, F***CK. In the distance, the generals who were in a daze didn't leave, and it was impossible for them to leave. Just as Fry said, they could afford to lose, but at least they had to know who they lost to. Otherwise, it would be difficult to untie the knot in their hearts. Of course, They also considered that when Tang In brought Lan Sha here for the first time, he concealed his identity, so he only asked Fry to come over and ask while they waited here. Now hearing this exclamation, everyone's body couldn't help but tremble. They subconsciously looked up and saw Tang In patting Frey's shoulder. He seemed to be saying something comforting, but the effect was obviously not good. After a moment, he shook his head, gave a simple salute to them from a distance, turned around, and walked to the main tent, leaving Fry, who was frozen in place, and lowered his head in silence. Seeing Tang In leave, everyone hurried over. "Captain Tang, what did an I Lao Hong say?" "General, who is that Lan Sha? Damn, I've never been so embarrassed in my life. Where did that arrogant girl come from?" In a storm of questions, Fry came back to his senses. He glanced at everyone and waved his hand with a complicated expression. "Don't ask. I can only say that we didn't lose unjustly this time. We didn't lose unjustly." After he finished speaking, he pushed away the stunned crowd, shook his head, and strode away. Immediately, there was a murmur from behind. "Strange. Where did she come from? Such a perverted girl. How come I've never heard of her before? I've also never seen her lead troops to war." He smiled bitterly. She led troops to war, but she didn't stand on Brand's side. Chapter 10:15. Although he had already said that he wanted to cause trouble for Wu Ding, Tang In certainly wouldn't immediately put it on the agenda. To make an inappropriate analogy, even a prisoner with a suspended death sentence would have a few months to live. The main reason was that Lan Sha needed at least a week of buffer time to truly take over as the commander of the Grey Coat Army. This was a necessary process, and it wasn't determined by Lan Sha's military commanding ability. After all, even if ordinary strangers met, it would take a period of time to get familiar with each other, not to mention that Lan Sha had to face hundreds of thousands of unfamiliar officers and soldiers, and it wasn't a very friendly start. Therefore, not to mention that Bamatu was worried about leaving. Even Tang In felt that it was necessary to stay for a period of time to hold the fort for her. However, Lan Sha obviously didn't have such self-awareness. The first order after he took office was for the army to rest for a day. Then he brought in a huge pile of intelligence and closed his door to read it for a day. The next day, he found Josiah, Fry, and the others, came up with a new strategy, and announced that the army was officially going to fight. Needless to say, this naturally caused a huge uproar and was unanimously opposed by almost all the high-ranking officers. It wasn't that they couldn't afford to lose and took the opportunity to retaliate, but they felt that Lan Sha's actions were too casual and reckless. Strategy wasn't tactics. Tactics were only the gains and losses of one battle, but strategy was related to the major prospects of the Grey Coat Army's survival. Previously, when the Grey Coat Army formulated a strategic plan, they didn't invite all the high-ranking officers to gather together and discuss for at least a few days or a few weeks before coming up with a prototype plan. But Lan Sha was good. He closed his door for a day and didn't invite anyone to discuss it. He directly skipped the deliberation stage and let the army execute it. This didn't seem reliable no matter how she looked at it. However, to say that almost all the high-ranking officers opposed it, there were naturally people who agreed or tacitly agreed. Among them were Josiah and Fry, two important figures in the Grey Coat Army. Josiah didn't say anything, but his attitude could be seen as tacitly agreeing. This was not surprising. After all, she supported Lan Sha from the beginning. But in a sense, Fry, whose job had been taken away from him, after looking at the strategic plan and asking Lan Sha a few questions sincerely, he uncharacteristically persuaded Skinny Monkey and the other generals close to him to support him. As such, Lan Sha's seemingly unreliable strategic plan naturally passed without a hitch. Really, Lan Sha calmly tidied up the strategic plan on the table as he watched the high-ranking generals leave. He shook his head and shrugged at Tang In, Josiah, and Fry, who were still in the room. "It's too strange. I haven't even looked at this strategic plan in detail. I don't even know what they're opposing." And that was the truth. From the beginning to the end of the meeting, Lan Sha presented the strategic plan, and then everyone unanimously opposed it. During this time, except for Fry, who asked a few questions about the strategic plan, the other high-ranking officers didn't read the entire plan at all. This made Lan Shah, who was prepared to explain, feel like he punched cotton. He couldn't help but feel a little depressed. Of course, in comparison, the high-ranking officers were undoubtedly even more depressed. Before they could voice out their doubts, the strategic plan was directly passed. It was completely unreasonable. Haha, serves you right. I should despise you, the late usurper. Tang In comforted them without any sincerity. He blinked at Fry, who was still reading the strategic plan seriously. Don't you think so, Brother Fry? Yes. In what? Fry raised his head subconsciously with a blank face. Ha, see? Tang In spread his hands at Lan Shah. Even a master said yes. It seems that you, the usurper, are really unpopular. Of course, this was a joke. Lan Shah didn't mind. He waved his hand casually. What usurper, late usurper? He paused and thought of something. He squinted at Josiah, who raised his head at the same time and looked away. Anyway, I don't expect to be popular. As long as they obey my orders on the battlefield, nothing else matters. Miss Lan Shah, please don't mind. At this time, Fry suddenly stood up and solemnly said, all officers and soldiers will obey your orders to the letter. I can assure you of that. And with Miss Lan Shah's ability, I believe that as long as you win a few battles, everyone will be convinced by you. Thank you, General Fry. Lan Shah was stunned. She looked at Frey's expression and realized something. She nodded with a smile and then waved her hand. As for whether they are convinced or not, it really doesn't matter. After all, I'm not here to steal people. If it really comes to that extent, it won't be good if it causes a misunderstanding. General Fry, don't you think so? Then we'll do as Miss Lan Shah says. After a short pause, Fry hesitated for a moment before continuing. There's one more thing. Although we are technically cooperating commanders, Miss Lan Shah will be in charge here. I hope you can give me some pointers as well. General Fry, you're too polite. Glancing at Tang In, Lan Shah had already confirmed that Fry knew her true identity. She bowed a brandwoman's salute and said casually, then I'll be cooperating with General Fry from now on. Please take care of me. Fry, who knew Lan Shah's true identity, didn't dare to be arrogant. He quickly returned the salute. It was a good start. With Frey's assistance, Lan Shah believed that the resistance to commanding the army would be much smaller. This was also the reason why Tang In only told Fry about Lan Shah's identity. Now that they had successfully achieved their goal, this seemingly brief meeting ended successfully. Because they had to immediately launch the battle plan, they didn't chat. First, Fry left and led the generals back to the front line, following which Victor brought his men over to break up the temporary tent. Tang In and the other two naturally walked out of the tent. Tang In. When Josiah walked away to be the commander in charge of moving the camp, Lan Shah suddenly called out to Tang In, who was leaving. She blinked and said, "Be careful. You must come back safely with Grandpa Bama too." Tang In was stunned when he heard this. He immediately reacted and touched his nose. "Thank you. Did Eldaba tell you everything?" Lan Shah shook his head with a smile. "Will you tell Josiah the truth about this?" No." After thinking about it, Tang In also shook his head. He shrugged. "Then that's it. Grandpa Bamadoo will also hide it from me. But it's not hard to guess, is it?" Lan Shah smiled and looked at the southern sky. When an empire not only has to face a strong external enemy, but also has to be resisted internally by its own people, it means that it is really time for it to be destroyed. This is the current situation of the brand. I believe many people can understand it. It's just that our standpoints are different. We want to speed up the destruction, and some people want to delay it. For example, the strongest person on the continent, who is called the Guardian by the brand. Yes, I know you're smart. Tang In glanced at Victor and the others in the distance and interrupted Lan Shah's analysis. This matter must be kept secret, especially from Josiah. Otherwise, what would she think when she found out that Twain had just returned from the front line and was courting death by going up against Wu Ding? Needless to say, she would definitely stop him, even if she had to pay the price for it. However, there were some things that it was useless to escape. What will come sooner or later. This was not just for Bamatu to hear. The northern wilderness tribes were fighting against the Bran, and the Gray Coat Army was also trying to poach people from the Bran. After all, they were enemies with the Bran. Therefore, as the guardian of the Bran, Wu Ding, of course, would not sit back and do nothing. Therefore, whether it was Bamatu or Tang In, because of their standpoints, the battle with Wu Ding was absolutely inevitable. Not to mention how confident he was in defeating Wu Ding, but now that he had the opportunity to pull Bamatu to his side, this was an absolutely rare opportunity. Of course, Tang In did not want to miss it. This was the so-called arrow on the bow that had to be released. Don't worry, I will help you hide it. Seeing how careful Tang In was, Lan Sha smiled and said, "This is a secret between the two of us. I promise not to let Josiah find out." "Thanks. Wait." Subconsciously looking at Lan Sha's smile, Tang In grinned as if he had a toothache. "We are friends. I'm under a lot of pressure. What do you mean by that heartless look on your face?" "Huh. I have confidence in you." "Haha, thank you. Although I don't even know what confidence is." Tang In did not have confidence in himself because he was facing the god of swords Wu Ding this time. Lan Sha was very confident in herself because she was crushing noobs. This was not an exaggeration. First of all, the enemy she was facing this time was not the powerful Bran's 3 major armies, nor were they regular veterans. Instead, they were unskilled reserve soldiers that the Northern Military Administration could not transfer to the front line. They were either new recruits who had just learned how to hold weapons without trembling, or retired veterans who had no choice but to come down from the front line because of their age and injuries. With such a group of uneven combat power, it was not a problem to encircle bandits and maintain the stability of the Bran's hinterland. However, it would be difficult for them to charge into the front line and destroy the city. Secondly, Lan Sha was now commanding the Gray Coat Army. Although they were no longer recognized as the strongest tribal warriors on the continent, they were still able to compete with the tribal warriors on the battlefield. To some extent, for Lan Sha, the soldiers of the Gray Coat Army were more powerful than the tribal warriors under her command. The reason was simple. Although the Gray Coat Army soldiers were generally less educated, they were still much better than the simple-minded barbarians. With Lan Sha's perfect strategic perspective, she was not afraid of encountering a famous general who was full of wisdom, nor was she worried about the disparity in strength. She also did not care about how detailed and cumbersome her orders were. What she was most afraid of was that her subordinates would not be able to understand her tactical intentions and would mess up an originally appropriate order. But there was no doubt that at least in this aspect, the soldiers of the Gray Coat Army were 3 streets ahead of the barbarian warriors. With such a subjective and objective advantage, the situation of the Gray Coat Army under the command of Lan Sha in the following week was self-evident. Advance, advance, continue to advance. Like a heavy chariot at maximum speed, the Gray Coat Army crushed everything in its path like a hot knife through butter. It could not stop at all. 2 large cities, 4 medium-sized towns, and uncountable farmlands. In just a short week, the Gray Army was like a terrifying giant beast that had just broken into the human world from the primitive world. It opened its bloody mouth and devoured countless spoils of war, not knowing when to stop. Obviously, the Northern Military Division did not realize that the Gray Coat Army of today was very different from before. If they did not pay attention, by the time they reacted, the Gray Coat Army had already entered the hinterland of the North. They were not far away from the Northern Military Division. As previously mentioned, the Brand's military strength in the North was not small. It was just that most of them were concentrated in the frontline area to prevent the barbarians from invading. Therefore, in the hinterland of the North, there were not many soldiers who could really fight. It was not that they did not want to station troops from the South. It was just that the hinterland of the North did not have any dangerous places to rely on as a defensive line. There was no place to station troops, even if they wanted to. Now that the Gray Coat Army had rushed in, they were like wolves that had jumped over the fence of sheep pen. They could not do whatever they wanted, but at least it was really difficult to chase them out. The war had reached this stage. It was obvious that a few newspapers and a few official announcements would not be able to whitewash the situation. As a new force, the Gray Coat Army officially stood in front of the brand. They were on the opposite side, and had started to shine with their own dazzling brilliance. The Northern Military Division was obviously caught off guard and was in a dilemma. They did not have enough soldiers to suppress the Gray Coat Army, and the regular troops at the front line did not dare to withdraw. They could only send cannon fodder to block the Gray Coat Army as they hurriedly sought reinforcements from the military in the capital. Disregarding the chaos on the brand's side, after a week of fighting, the Gray Coat Army had been reborn. They were really strong from top to bottom. Just as Lan Shah had said before, she did not need to be welcomed by the high-ranking generals of the Gray Coat Army. It was meaningless to her. She only needed to obey, obey, and obey. Then, with victory after victory, one after another, she would naturally let the generals of the Gray Coat Army recognize her military commandability. That was enough. And it was obvious that in the face of this pile of actual achievements that could not be ignored, the attitude of the generals could be imagined. Now, even if they did not go through Fry, the generals would respect Lan Shah's orders like the voice of a god and resolutely carry out them. This was the valiant charm of the commander of an army. Of course, this had little to do with Tang En. After the Gray Coat Army officially charged into the heart of the brand, Tang En found an excuse and quietly left with Bamatu, rushing towards the south of the brand. Of course, they did not directly charge towards the brand capital. Tang En was not so arrogant as to send himself to the tiger's mouth with the strength of the two of them, directly challenging all the experts of the brand. In fact, Tang En had no intention of going south at all. He wanted Wu Ding to take the initiative to come to them. So he was destroying all the long-range teleportation arrays that could reach the south above a large city. Tang En stood in the void, looking down at the spatial magic tower that was emitting thick black smoke. He nodded in satisfaction, then spread out the simple map in his hand and glanced at it. Let's go. The next location is Mountain Creek City, 300 kilometers to the east. Yo, the holy city in the north. I'm familiar with that place. On the side, Bamatu frowned when he saw this. Must we do this? Although he said this, his hands did not slow down. He put a hand on Tang En's shoulder and instantly disappeared, turning into a black stream of light that rushed towards the east. This speed was difficult for ordinary people to catch up with the naked eye. However, Tang En, who was in the middle of it, did not feel any discomfort. The biting cold wind at the high altitude was also secretly isolated by Bamatu through some means, and it was very comfortable. Slowly putting away the map, Tang En replied with a smile, "Of course. Elder Ba, you're not from the brand, so you don't know that there are 3 ways to come from the south of the brand to the north. The first is by land, the second is by water, and the third is directly through the long-range teleportation array. Putting the first 2 aside, if Wu Ding wants to come over, he will definitely choose to use the long-range teleportation array. This way, we won't be able to guess his whereabouts. And once he gets close to the Gray Coat Army's encampment, then the safety of Lan Shah, who you care so much about, will be hard to say." "I see." Bamatu nodded subconsciously when he heard this, but the wrinkles between his brows did not disappear. "But even if we destroy all the teleportation arrays that go directly to the south, the brand is so big. How will you guess Wu Ding's whereabouts and intercept him halfway?" "Ha! Then we'll talk about the other 2 ways to travel. Let's talk about the land route first. The land route between the south and the north has always been a lawless area, and there are as many bandits as there are hairs on a cow. Of course, Wu Ding definitely doesn't care about this. But it's worth mentioning that the land route is the longest, and there are many mountain ranges. The terrain is rugged, and vehicles can't pass through it. So Wu Ding will take the water route." Tang En nodded affirmatively. "It's very possible. At least if we intercept him there, the chances of success are much higher than if we take the land route." Bamatu was still worried and asked, "If we don't wait for him and miss him, what will Lan Shah do?" "Don't worry, Elder Ba. I won't do something I'm not sure of." "Don't forget, Josiah and Lansha are together now. Tang In smiled confidently and explained with squinted eyes, the Gray Coat Army has an intelligence agency in the north. As long as Wu Ding comes, we'll be able to find him. Also, I already reminded Lansha when we came out. She's so smart, so of course she knows how to protect herself and command in stealth. At this point, Bamatu was not an indecisive person, so he naturally understood that there was no such thing as no risk, so he nodded and didn't say anything else. Tang In suddenly asked, actually, there's another reason for destroying the long-distance teleportation portal. I wonder if Elderbach can guess it? Bamatu was stunned when he heard this, but before he could think about it, Tang In leaned closer and smiled, looking like a lackey. He answered his own question. Elderbach, you're also an expert. You should know that when experts fight, victory and defeat are often decided by a hair's breadth. If we destroy the long-distance teleportation portal here, Wu Ding can only rely on ordinary means to come here. And, Wu Ding is also quite old, so this should consume a lot of his energy. And if we can intercept him halfway, it's equivalent to waiting for him to tire himself out. Slightly stunned, Bamatu couldn't help but raise his head and laugh. The girl is right. You're really cunning. Elderbach, what are you talking about? I'm just thinking of an idea for you. Tang In spread his hands helplessly when he heard this, as if he had been wronged. However, he was secretly delighted. He couldn't wait to think of more ways to maintain the balance of power between Bamatu and Wu Ding, and then pray that the two of them would die together. Everyone would be happy. Chapter 10:16. Of course, it was just Tang In's beautiful fantasy to say that they would perish together. This kind of situation did happen, but it was rare. Just as Tang In said before, when experts fought, they would fight for the slightest distance. In fact, the so-called slightest distance was actually the difference between heaven and earth. Tang In did not know who was stronger between Bamatu and Wu Ding, and it was impossible for him to know. If one did not reach that height, it was impossible to see everything clearly. It was just like how people who were halfway up the mountain would never know the scenery at the top of the mountain. However, Tang In could guess that more than 10 years ago, Bamatu was defeated by Wu Ding's sword and was chased out of Bran. More than 10 years later, although Bamatu devoted himself to cultivation, it was impossible for Wu Ding not to make any progress. Therefore, in Tang In's opinion, Bamatu's current strength should still be a little worse than Wu Ding's. If it was in the past, how Bamatu was defeated was none of Tang In's business. However, now that Bamatu was in the same boat as him, the situation was different. It was precisely because of this that Tang In was now very keen on these pre-battle tricks. He was really not just joking. If it was possible, every expert would want to have a fair and square duel with him. Even as a bystander, it would be fun to watch, right? However, now that it involved the future of the Gray Coat Army survival, and more importantly, whether it was Tang In or Bamatu, they were not confident that they could escape unscathed from Wu Ding. Tang In decisively became shameless. He threw aside all thoughts of being unpresentable, wretched, despicable, and so on. As long as he could think of it, as long as it worked, Tang In did not mind trying all kinds of tricks one by one. After all, he was a killer and an assassin. Tang In still had professional ethics, so there was no sense of guilt at all. On the contrary, Tang In felt that this was a virtue. As long as he did it, even if it was an insignificant action, it would have some effect. It didn't matter if the effect was weak or even negligible. It could be slowly accumulated and brewed. A quantitative change could always lead to a qualitative change. Wasn't that right? Well, let's look away for now. Just as the Gray Coat Army was killing in all directions and stirring up the wind and clouds, just as Tang In was carrying the spirit of the foolish old man, moving the mountains and running around and selling his moral integrity. In the capital of Bran, Haita, the teacher in charge of teaching the princes and princesses of the imperial court, and the only contact between the imperial court and the sword god Wu Ding, once again stepped into Wu Ding's small residence. Master, this is the current situation. Tang In's whereabouts were still unknown, but the Gray Coat Army had uncharacteristically launched a large-scale attack. They broke through the encirclement and attacked the northern hinterland. The Northern Military Division is unable to suppress them and has sent out several requests for reinforcements. Tell me about your judgment. There are two possibilities. One is that something happened to Tang Yin, and the Gray Coat Army took revenge. Master, you know that the leader of the Gray Coat Army, Josiah, and Tang Yin are lovers. Therefore, after confirming that something happened to Tang Yin, it is very likely that he will choose to take revenge on Bran regardless of the consequences. There is another possibility that Tang Yin has returned safely. Josiah no longer has any scruples, so he led the Gray Coat Army to start a war. Which one do you think it is? Pause for a while. Haita loosened the button on his neck and muttered to himself for a while. He gritted his teeth and said, "The first possibility. Master, our previous plan was too one-sided. We thought that the barbarian army would retreat after killing the highest commander of the barbarians. However, the situation at the border has deteriorated to the extreme. Even if Tang Yin succeeds, the barbarian army will not choose to retreat after occupying the defensive line at the border, because this is the best opportunity that they have been waiting for a long time. The current situation is as such. Although the barbarian army has not advanced directly, there are no signs of retreat either. Instead, they are repairing the city wall with the intention of consolidating the rear." Haitao paused and looked at Wu Ding, who did not express his opinion. He pursed his lips and said, "I also came to the conclusion that Tang Yin has failed. Because if Tang Yin really killed the highest commander of the barbarians, the tribe will certainly not let it go. They will at least send an army to hunt him down, and it will not be as peaceful as it is now." When Silin, who was sitting silently on the side, could not help but nod when he heard this. Obviously, he also agreed with this deduction. Wu Ding was silent for a while. He raised his head and looked at Haita's expression. He asked slowly, "You were a little hesitant before making a judgment. What else did you not say?" "Well, I can't hide it from Master." Haita was stunned when he heard this. He nodded and said with a frown, "Actually, I am not hiding it. I just feel that this matter is too absurd." "Oh, tell me about it." "Master, you know that although we have been talking about the Gray Coat Army before, we did not really care. We only thought that the northern wilderness tribes were the enemy. But now, the Gray Coat Army is fully fledged, especially after they broke through the blockade and entered the hinterland of the north a few days ago. They can now pose a real threat to the stability of the empire. The military has also collected some information about the Gray Coat Army's battle situation. They are preparing to analyze it in detail and then transfer the corresponding generals from the south to suppress them. But the analysis result is somewhat absurd." Hada took a deep breath. It should be because the result was too shocking. He had known it long ago, but his expression was still very strange when he said it. The previous battle situation was not a problem, not a big problem. The fighting power of the Gray Coat Army soldiers is indeed amazing. The military speculates that they are not inferior to the regular soldiers of the brand. In particular, they have a weapon called the Purple Chamber Cannon in their hands. Its power is even more amazing. Of course, this is not the main point. The main point is the battle situation of the Gray Coat Army after they broke through. Not long ago, the military said that the commander's style is very familiar. Whether it is tactical command, soldier deployment, strategic thinking, etc., it is very similar to the style of the mysterious barbarian commander who fought with the frontline army. Or to be more precise, the current commander of the Gray Coat Army is more concise, more efficient, and more powerful than the mysterious barbarian commander. When Silin was startled when he heard this, he instantly understood Haita's hesitation. His face was also full of absurdity as he subconsciously said, "Senior brother, you mean the mysterious barbarian commander has gone to the Gray Army to command the army?" It just feels similar. So I also said that it is very absurd." Haida spread out his hands. He was obviously speechless at the result given by the military. He laughed dryly to clear his name. But at this moment, he saw Wu Ding's expression from the corner of his eyes. He was stunned. He lowered his head and frowned. Wu Ding, who was wearing a velvet blanket, did not have any trace of absurdity in his expression. Instead, he seemed to be thinking about something. His expression was like the wind and the clouds. Master! Haida was startled when he saw this. He thought of something. His expression was also brilliant, but it was still mostly in disbelief. He licked his lips and asked tentatively, "You don't think that the result given by the military, don't say any more." Raising his head, the corners of Wu Ding's mouth curled up, revealing a rare, bitter smile. He then shook his head. The velvet blanket on his shoulders slipped down quietly. He waved his hand. "Go, bring my sword. We will go down the mountain now." This is impossible." Wu Ding's attitude was no doubt that he recognized Wincelin's casual words. But now, the latter certainly did not feel any joy. He shook his head with an absurd expression and shouted in denial. "Before this, I also thought that no one could successfully assassinate me under my nose. What happened in the end?" Wu Ding smiled bitterly and shook his head. "This Lil Tang don't feel strange about anything he does. It's a pity that I didn't realize it until now. I was fooled. Haha, it seems that I am really old." Haita barely suppressed the shock in his heart. He frowned deeply. "Master, you said that. Do you have any clues?" "There are no clues, or even if there were, we wouldn't think in that direction." "But," Wu Ding rubbed his eyebrows. "No matter what method Lil Tang used, if we assume that he brought the mysterious barbarian commander to the Greycoat army, then we look at the reaction of the barbarian army. Do you still think it's strange?" Haita and Wincelin were shocked when they heard this. Their expressions gradually changed. Everything was afraid of the cause. No matter how complicated the game was, as long as the game was reviewed, the mistakes and flaws in it would be exposed one by one. Let's think about it slowly on the way. Wu Ding slowly stood up. His old and thin body gradually straightened. He was like a hatchet that had been washed of rust. He was as cold as ice water. "Now, take the sword and go down the mountain." Thinking about the guy he called Lil Tang, Wu Ding's mood was a little complicated. It was like drinking a soup that had 5 flavors: sour, sweet, bitter, spicy, and salty. He didn't deliberately taste any of them. It was just a simple and indescribable feeling. He couldn't say that he was deceived, nor could he say that he was angry. This was the principle. You can't only be allowed to scheme against the other party and not accept the fact that the other party played you back. With Wu Ding's demeanor, of course, he wouldn't be like this. Therefore, when he thought of Tangen's actions, Wu Ding didn't have any bad feelings. He just lamented that he was indeed old. He had a helpless melancholy similar to being beaten to death on the beach by the waves behind. Of course, no matter how complicated this feeling was, it wouldn't affect Wu Ding's judgment. Since the Greycoat army was very likely to join forces with the Northern Wilderness tribes, then for the old man who had guarded Bran all his life, they were also enemies. And since they were enemies, then Wu Ding certainly wouldn't miss the perfect opportunity to wipe out leader Josiah and the mysterious commander of the Northern Wilderness tribes. Therefore, going down the mountain was an inevitable choice. However, unlike the last time when he went down the mountain, Wu Ding, who knew that the opportunity was fleeting, didn't go on foot. Instead, he entered the capital of Bran with Wincelin and chose the most convenient and fastest way to travel, the long-distance teleportation portal. Of course, Wu Ding, who had always disliked ostentation, didn't have the thought of meeting the nobles of the royal court, even though he rarely walked into the capital of Bran openly in decades. He directly went to the location of the spatial magic tower in the capital. Outside the tower, Haita, who had returned to the capital first, led an old man with a magic staff and quickly greeted him. "Master, everything is ready. This is the spatial magician who will take us to the north this time." Looking at the old magician, who was obviously in a hurry and had a blank face, Wu Ding nodded lightly. Then he glanced at the 7 or 8 warriors behind Haita, who bowed in unison and couldn't help but frown slightly. These warriors weren't young. Some of them even had a head of white hair. The youngest was middle-aged. They all looked at Wu Ding with a solemn face. With Wu Ding's level of vision, of course, he could see that these people were all true masters of fighting aura. The weakest middle-aged man had already stepped into the threshold of the Void Realm. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that any one of these people had the qualifications to be in charge of a region. Such a luxurious lineup that could be called terrifying. Even the top noble families couldn't afford it. But Haida was able to gather it in such a short time, which was undoubtedly abnormal. However, combined with the other party's excited expression and gaze, it seemed that they all knew Wu Ding's true identity. It wasn't difficult to guess where they came from. His voice trembled. "Master, take these royal consecrators." Seeing Wu Ding's displeasure, Haita still bowed and insisted. On the side, Wincelin also bowed, silently expressing the same attitude. Such a request with a hint of coercion was undoubtedly rude, but Haita had a reason to do so. Outsiders didn't know, but as disciples, of course, they knew about the invincible sword god Bran in front of them, who had dominated the continent for more than 100 years. The strongest man on the continent. Now, he was really old. He was so old that he looked like an ordinary old man. The wrinkles on his face could no longer find a foothold on the wrinkles carved by time. Instead, they were replaced by patches of brown age spots of various shades. He was so old that he felt the biting cold of winter in advance. Even if he put on thick cotton clothes and blankets, he gradually could not maintain the little warmth on his old body. He was so old that he suffered from all kinds of unimaginable and impossible injuries in the past. Even a small cold and severe cough could not be stopped with the help of medicinal pills. Everything was swallowing this once insufferably arrogant, peerless master. It was said that since ancient times, beauties were like famous generals. Beauties were like this, famous generals were like this, and even the strong sword god had to be like this. Haita knew that this was an excellent opportunity, but who could guarantee that when Wu Ding went down the mountain again, it wouldn't be the last time he swung his sword? He didn't dare to gamble, nor could he gamble. That was why there was such a spectacular scene of several royal consecrators accompanying him. The idea was to use them to fight in place of Wu Ding to minimize the risk. A moment later, "Let's go." Wu Ding shook his head, crossed Haita, and stepped into the spatial magic tower. How could he not know the intentions of his eldest disciple? Not refusing was tacit agreement. "Let's go. Let's go." Haita was overjoyed when he saw this. He hurriedly got up and called the spatial mage and the royal consecrators, and they filed in. Not long after, a mysterious light rose from the top of the tower, and this luxurious and terrifying team officially set off on their journey. As mentioned earlier, the long-distance teleportation array was indeed the fastest way to travel in the world. But of course, it didn't mean that one could go from the south of Bran to the north in an instant. The long-distance teleportation array wasn't that crazy. Maybe the ancient teleportation array could, but the ancient arrays that had been passed down to this day were more or less incomplete, and the effect was greatly reduced. Basically, the path that Wu Ding and the others were taking now was roughly the route that Tang and took not long ago from the south to the north. The difference was that Tang and used coercion at that time, while Wu Ding and the others certainly didn't. The spatial mages in the tower didn't dare to come up to collect fees or sign their names. After Haita revealed his identity and took out the royal token, they had to take the initiative to offer the space crystal and bow 90 degrees to send them off. Oh, there was also a little difference. It was when Wu Ding and the others came to the southern border and could easily step into the northern border with the next teleportation. They got stuck. To be honest, this scene was a bit funny. Not to mention this luxurious team that was full of vigor. Wu Ding, who rarely went down the mountain and used the long-distance teleportation array, could be considered to be trying to catch up with the trend, but in the end, something went wrong in his first experience. Turning his head to look at the old spatial mage who was constantly waving his staff and sweating cold sweat, Wu Ding looked at Haita somewhat inexplicably. "What's going on?" "Master, please wait a moment." Haita frowned and passed through the crowd, briefly communicating with the old spatial mage and the mage in charge here before turning back. "There's a problem. We can't connect to a predetermined northern teleportation array." But it shouldn't be a big problem. We can just change the location. As it turned out, the problem was very big. For the next period of time, everyone watched the old spatial mage constantly waving his staff and chanting spells. He was sweating profusely as he tried all the connection points. Then, he jumped out of the array and began to check the space crystal placed there, as well as the local teleportation array's route. Haita, who had returned, was somewhat helpless. "Master, it seems that we need to wait. There seems to be a problem with the teleportation array here. It can't connect to any of the northern points, so we can't teleport for the time being." As everyone knew, a long-distance teleportation array that involved the mysterious and unfathomable mysteries of space was an extremely delicate thing. Not to mention that there couldn't be the slightest deviation in the teleportation steps. Even the array itself was prone to all kinds of problems. Therefore, no matter when or where the array broke, it wouldn't be surprising. Because of this, when the array couldn't teleport, Haita and the others subconsciously thought that there was a problem with the array, but they didn't think that a slut would actually destroy all the northern teleportation arrays that could connect to the south. Wu Ding frowned and asked, "How long will it take to fix it?" It's hard to say. It was still the same problem. Since it involved space and ancient arrays, Haita didn't dare guarantee that the array could be fixed immediately, or that it would take 8 to 10 days before it could operate normally. After pondering for a while, Wu Ding asked again, "How far is it from here to the north?" "There's still some distance. Master, you want to—" After understanding Wu Ding's meaning, Haita's expression suddenly changed, and he resolutely shook his head. "No, absolutely not." Wu Ding going down the mountain was already a burden, and if the journey was bumpy and tiring, then Wu Ding's old body. You know very well how rare this opportunity is. It's related to the survival of the empire. Besides, I'm not so old that I can't walk. After shouting in a deep voice, Wu Ding no longer paid attention to Haita and directly waved his hand and ordered, "Choose the nearest route," and set off immediately. After persisting for a while, seeing that Wu Ding's expression was getting gloomier and gloomier, and that the old space mage didn't have any clue, Haita could only helplessly lower his head. "Go to the nearest port by water. It's closer by water." Chapter 10:17. For Wu Ding and his team, the so-called distance didn't actually refer to the distance. It was more about how easy it was to travel. If they traveled by land, with the bad road conditions between the north and the south, taking a carriage would undoubtedly not work. If they chose to fly, it would consume a lot of energy. But taking a boat by water was different. Although it might not be faster than a carriage, it didn't consume any energy. As long as they didn't suffer from seasickness, the journey would be very easy. It was precisely because of the difference between the two that when he saw Wu Ding insisted on leaving, Haita immediately thought of taking the water route. Of course, someone also thought the same. At the beginning of the new year, because of the inability of the northern military, the news that the Gray Coat Army was abnormally active spread throughout the Brand. At this time, in the Brand, the Northern Wilderness Army was eyeing the Brand covetously from the outside, and the Gray Coat Army was taking advantage of the situation. Under the internal and external troubles, the people in the south of the Brand didn't have their usual leisurely state of mind. Although they might not panic, they were still worried. Any rumor that had not been verified could cause a great commotion. Everyone was discussing it animatedly, causing everyone to be in a state of panic. Under this situation, the economy in the north and the south was undoubtedly greatly affected. The Lino River, which was known as the economic artery of the Brand, was unusually deserted. There were almost no large merchant ships coming from the south to the north. Relatively speaking, there were more and more official ships transporting passengers from the north to the south. Of course, this was not the main point. The main point was that recently, among the few ships that were still traveling back and forth, there was an anecdote that was circulating. In the officially designated safe waters, an inconspicuous small boat was stuck at the mouth of a key river for a few days and nights without any signs of movement. This situation was undoubtedly abnormal. At first, The crew thought it was an abandoned ship, but when they got closer, they found that there was someone on the ship. It was a young man. Most of the time, he sat on the bow of the ship. Except for the swaying of the ship, there was almost no sign of movement. It was not that there weren't any kind ships that approached and asked if he needed help, but the response was that the young man just smiled and shook his head. He didn't say anything and just sat there. As time passed, no one paid any more attention to it. Originally, this matter was considered to have come to an end. After all, no one was willing to meddle in other people's business when they were outside. Furthermore, this young man was clearly abnormal. Perhaps there was something wrong with his head, so he couldn't afford to offend him. However, a piece of news soon spread, bringing the strange boat and the strange young man into everyone's field of vision. The source of the news could no longer be verified. The general content was that a pirate ship had passed by the mouth of the river and happened to see this strange little boat. Although this strange boat was stuck at the mouth of the mouth of the river was abnormally wide. This boat was not arrogantly lying in the middle of the water, so it did not affect anything at all. Moreover, this lone boat monster didn't look like it was worth anything. Even if it was a water bandit who hadn't opened for business for half a month, he wouldn't be interested in it. However, there were too many idle people in the world who knew what went wrong, but these passing water bandits actually had the idea of teasing that strange youth. Then, according to the sailors on the passing ships, they only saw a flash of a figure, and then the dozen or so pirates, together with the ship under their feet, capsized and fell into the river. Very quickly, they sank into the river and disappeared. Of course, rumors were always unreliable. This was only one of the most concise versions. There is also a rumor that this young man was actually a water element magician. He stayed here to feel the water element at a close distance. Those unlucky water bandits were directly swallowed by the surrounding river water. This was an advanced version. There was also a most ridiculous version. It was said that this young man was actually the incarnation of an evil spirit in the water. He stayed here to attract curious people and then drag them into the river to claim their lives. All right, it didn't matter if these rumors were true or false. It didn't matter who this strange young man was. The result was unchanged. From then on, no ship dared to pass by the surrounding waters, much less approach that lone boat monster. It was noon, and the weather was gloomy. The gray sky had started to drizzle since early morning. At this time, the rain showed signs of increasing. Looking over, the entire river surface was covered in a layer of gray mist. It shrouded the surface of the river and had a hazy and freehand beauty. Of course, this beauty was not appreciated by the strange young man who had been sitting at the bow of the ship without moving. There was no shelter on the small boat. After the rain hit, if he didn't want to move or bathe in the river, then he had to get up every once in a while and use a wooden ladle to splash the water out of the cabin. If this somewhat embarrassing scene was seen by the sailors who didn't dare to approach, then the rumors about this young man being a water element magician, water ghost, and other ridiculous identities would be dispelled. He got up and wiped the rain off his face. After draining the water in the cabin once again, the young man casually threw down the wooden ladle. With a gloomy face, he looked up at the sky and sighed. Damn, I've been too pretentious. If I had known, I would have bought a big ship to lie down on. Isn't this suffering? There was no need to guess. The only person in the world who could so freely destroy the beauty of the current situation with no bottom line was probably Tang En. From the rumors circulating on this route, it could be known that Tang En had actually been here for a long time. He also tasted the sweetness of the farm last time. Thinking of the novels and movies in the modern world, the protagonist would often have an epiphany and breakthrough after looking at famous mountains and rivers, and then their strength would soar. Therefore, Tang En also did this. He deliberately bought such a broken boat and floated on the river's surface all day. If he didn't enter the system for training, he would sit at the bow of the ship and watch the sunrise and sunset, the rise and fall of the tide. As a result, he really had an epiphany. He seemed to have been too pretentious. Damn, 9 days have passed. Do you still want to wait? Just when Tang In was intoxicated by this realization and couldn't extricate himself, an old voice suddenly sounded in his ears. It seemed to be impatient. Of course. Casually waving at the gloomy sky above, Tang In sat back at the bow of the ship and replied with certainty. I have a hunch that Wu Ding is coming. You said the same 3 days ago. Ahem, it's different this time. Not everyone who had their lies exposed in public would be ashamed. At least Tang In, who never knew what the bottom line was, wouldn't. He just coughed twice, opened his hands magnanimously, and said in an exaggerated tone, Do you feel it, Elder Ba? Looking at this atmosphere, this environment, this climate, do you have a feeling that a great war is about to break out? Does the feeling of wanting to beat someone count? No, he simply refused. Tang In shook his head with regret. Elder Ba, this is the difference between professions. You are an expert and have an unusually keen perception. But unfortunately, you are not an assassin, so you lack a sense of foresight for impending danger. Believe me, wait a little longer, Wu Ding will definitely come. Hee, this excuse is fresh. Then let's wait a little longer. Elder Ba is wise. The conversation ended. He cupped his hands and flattered without any sincerity. Tang In continued to sit at the bow of the ship, holding his chin and staring at the muddy river in a daze. That's right, the foresight for impending danger, and so on were all made up by Tang In. He didn't even believe it himself. Elder Ba probably didn't believe it either, but because they had already waited for 9 days, the two of them were in a bit of a dilemma and didn't want to give up easily. Logically speaking, when the Gray Coat army suddenly rose up like they had taken an aphrodisiac, Wu Ding's side would definitely sense that something was wrong. They would then go down the mountain with their swords and seize this excellent opportunity to wipe them out. And now, all the teleportation circles that connected the south to the north were destroyed by them. Between the remaining land and water routes, Tang In was 80% sure that Wu Ding would choose the water route. Of course, all these were just baseless guesses. There were too many variables. For example, Wu Ding didn't immediately see that something was wrong with the Gray Coat army situation. Or maybe it wasn't Wu Ding who came, or even if he came, he just wanted to go by land and so on. There was no other way. This was also the so-called man proposes, God disposes principle. However, this time, God seemed to be on Tang In's side. A surprised exclamation suddenly sounded in his ears. It immediately startled Tang In, who was in a daze. He couldn't help but grin when he came back to his senses. Elder Ba, what are you trying to do this time? Or are you an expert? Can you calm down a little, okay? Okay. After a pause, an indifferent voice sounded. Your assassin's premonition seems to have come true. Really? Then it's really? As he answered casually, Tang In's body suddenly shook. His expression changed unpredictably. The next moment, he suddenly jumped up like a corpse and shouted in ecstasy. They're here? They're really here. Calm down. You're also an expert. F***CK. How could he still be calm? Is Wu Ding here? It seemed that he couldn't accept Tang In's shameless face. After a pause, Bamitu's angry voice sounded. I don't know. The distance is too far, and my perception is fuzzy. I can only roughly feel that many experts are coming here. Elder Ba, the experts you mentioned are above void level? Nonsense. Then they can't run away. It must be them. Void masters were not cabbages in the fields. They could be casually picked. The actual situation that Tang In knew was that there were very few warriors who could break through to void level. Listening to Bamitu's tone, it was obvious that there were more than 1 or 2 void level experts coming here. And in the Brand, only the Brand Palace and the Temple of Light could gather such a luxurious lineup. With such a combination, Tang In's confidence in his own judgment was greatly increased. Of course, this was not the main point now. What about Wu Ding? Is he here? As soon as the words came out, Tang In knew that he had asked a stupid question. The perception of an expert was not omnipotent, especially for an expert of the same level. As long as they did not meet face to face, as long as the other party did not deliberately release their aura, it was difficult for the other party to detect. Sure enough, Bamitu shouted angrily. Nonsense! You asked me, who should I ask? I don't even know when you sneaked into the girls' room. And you want me to perceive Wu Ding from such a distance? Hee hee, I'm just asking, don't be angry. With two laughs, Tang In touched his chin and thought for a while, and he could not help but frown. This is not good. With Wu Ding's strength, why would he need so many experts to accompany him to the north? Could it be that he didn't come? Tang In and Bamitu ran around destroying the teleportation circle and spent so much effort to create this scene, all for Wu Ding. If he did not come, then all of this would undoubtedly be meaningless. However, Bamitu was calm. It doesn't matter. Sooner or later we will meet. Before the next time we meet, we can warm up and deliver the heads of these experts. It's also a good start. Tang In thought about it and no longer hesitated. He sat back on the bow and waved his hand. Since Elder Ba is so enthusiastic, these experts will be left to you. Why? Don't you want to take the opportunity to test your strength after the breakthrough? You must know that experts are hard to find, and a suitable sharpening stone is even harder to find. Forget it, I'm from the brand. What a joke. Who would test their strength on a warrior of the same level? Isn't that asking for trouble? It was not that he was afraid. There were already several void-level powerhouses who had died in Tang In's hands. It was just that there was no need. Why would he risk his life if he could easily deal with them? If he was injured, he would still have to suffer. Bamitu, of course, did not believe Tang In's casual reason, but seeing that Tang In really did not want to fight, he laughed and did not continue. However, the facts proved that it was useless to hide from Tang, at this time more than 10 nautical miles away. A medium-sized Imperial transport ship was cutting through the giant waves and approaching at high speed. There were very few guests on the ship, only a dozen or so, which seemed a bit abnormal, but in fact, no matter who it was, they all had the power to mobilize a large transport ship. At the bow of the ship, Haita was holding an oilcloth umbrella. He stepped on the wet deck and quickly opened it while complaining, "Master, it's raining. Why are you here? You're just too careful. Your master is not that old. I can't even withstand a little wind and rain." After a pause, Wu Ding narrowed his eyes and looked at the gray river in the distance, frowning slightly as if he was searching for something. "What's wrong, master? Is there something wrong?" Just now in the cabin, there seems to be a faint perception sweeping. Wu Ding's tone was not very sure. He hesitated, raised his hand, and pointed to the river on the right side. "It seems to be in that direction." Haita looked and was stunned. Paused for a while. He asked tentatively, "Master, you mean more than 10 kilometers away?" Wu Ding was silent. This was why he was not sure. To be able to cover such a long distance, even if it was faint to the point that it could almost be ignored, it was undoubtedly a top powerhouse in his realm. But was there such a powerhouse in the brand? After hesitating, Wu Ding shook his head and said, "Call everyone over, just in case." "Yes." Although he responded, Haita did not immediately leave, as if he thought of something, if there's really someone waiting there. "Master, have we been tricked?" "Don't rush to a conclusion. It's just a vague feeling. It doesn't count." Waving his hand, Wu Ding narrowed his eyes. "But now that I think about it, the long-distance teleportation array was broken at the wrong time." A quarter of an hour later, in the distant fog, the vague outline of a medium-sized transport ship gradually appeared in Tang In's vision. Startled, Tang In looked at the bow of the ship, narrowed his eyes, and narrowed them again. His expression changed, and he slowly got up. "Elder Ba, it seems that you don't need to warm up." In terms of long-distance perception, Tang In was not as good as Bamitu. This was determined by strength. However, in terms of close distance, regardless of whether it was Bamitu or Wu Ding, they were not as good as Twain. This was determined by Twain's killing intent that had been tempered over and over again. Bamitu did not reply. He believed in Tang In's judgment, so he did not need to. The river water swayed gently, and light rain fell. A kind of stagnant atmosphere called a war was about to break out. Along with the surface of the river, surging secretly soon, when the transport ship in the distance came to a position parallel to Tang In's boat, it gradually slowed down, and then slowly turned the hull, heading in the direction of Tang In. Needless to say, the other side had undoubtedly discovered the existence of Tang In. You're finally here, Elder Wu. The focus of Tang Yin's vision did not change. It was always on the bow of the transport ship, the thin figure standing in the middle of the crowd, under the oilcloth umbrella. To be honest, he could not see clearly, but Tang Yin knew that Wu Ding was also looking at him at this time. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, a faint smile. Tang Yin's mood was really relaxed now. Even if he knew that he was about to face the sword god Wu Ding, who was known as the #1 master of the continent, his state of mind was unprecedentedly calm. This calm, with a hint of pride, did not come from Bamatu, who was hiding in the air, but from Tang Yin himself. Tang Yin had reason to be proud. He had only been in this world for a few years, and he came as a third-rate student with no strength. But now, his enemy was the #1 master of the world. Just this comparison alone was enough to make him confident, reserved, and arrogant. About 20 feet away, the transport ship that was slowly moving forward by inertia finally stopped. After a moment of silence, Wu Ding looked down at Tang Yin, who was standing straight on the boat like a long spear. He did not show the surprised expression on Haida's and Winston's faces, but patted the side of the ship. He suddenly smiled and nodded. "It really is you, little Tang Yin." With this sentence, all the doubts were naturally solved, and they became no longer important. Tang Yin also smiled and bowed. "Long time no see, Elder Wu." He got up and spread out his hands. "Have you had lunch?" "Huh." Amidst the stunned experts, Wu Ding suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed heartily. Then, he shook his head and said with a smile, "Little Tang, your way of greeting, well, it's still so direct and polite. Have you had lunch?" This was the greeting Tang Yin used when he and Wu Ding met for the first time. Now that they met for the second time, Tang Yin's greeting was still the same, but this time was destined to be different. Last time, Tang Yin invited Wu Ding for lunch, so it was naturally impossible this time. "Then, for the sake of my politeness, can you consider the possibility of going home?" Touching his nose, Tang Yin smiled embarrassedly. "Sorry, I'm so direct, so willful." Chapter 10:18. So you're saying that you've been waiting for us here intentionally. So, you betrayed the brand, betrayed the empire that gave birth to you? The atmosphere between Tang Yin and Wu Ding was quite good, especially when Tang Yin showed his moral integrity without any limits, and Wu Ding couldn't help but laugh. The atmosphere of the conversation was very harmonious. However, after Hai Ta's sudden cold question, the atmosphere instantly disappeared. Of course, this kind of verbal attack was naturally ineffective against Tang Yin. Not to mention other things, his identity as a transmigrator meant that he had no sense of belonging to the Bran Empire. He smiled and spread out his hands, saying disapprovingly, "Correction, I'm not from the Bran Empire. You're from the Grey Coat Army, right?" Haita narrowed his eyes and took a step forward, his face full of anger. "It seems that you really colluded with the northern wilderness tribes and betrayed the empire to the enemy." Betrayed the empire to the enemy. Huh? Tang Yin couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. "Don't you think it's funny? If I remember correctly, or if you didn't choose to forget, just last year, the Greycloth Army also fought their way out of the 100,000 Mountains, but when they were about to attack Bulan City, they restrained themselves and chose to negotiate with your empire. What was the result?" He sneered and looked at the silent Haita. "At that time, where was the empire that gave birth to you?" "Oh, stabbing you in the back?" After a pause, Haita subconsciously avoided Tang Yin's gaze. "But you're from a Bran after all. You shouldn't have colluded with the barbarians." "Nonsense." Tang Yin was even more disdainful. "First of all, this is cooperation. Just like last year, we cooperated with you. Secondly, according to what you said, the Grey Coat Army should die. Even if they resist, they have to wear the cover of the brand. You colluded with outsiders, so you must die." Of the three great disciples of the sword god, Haita was the most inarticulate. In this way, he naturally lost without any suspense when arguing with Tang Yin. However, it was precisely because of this character that Haita's disposition was the most firm and wouldn't be easily shaken in the slightest. Slightly stunned, Tang In clapped and laughed. Huh, that's how it should be. You guys came here with bad intentions, and I'm here to stop you. What kind of debate is this? We're all martial artists. Naturally, whoever's fist is bigger is the one who's right. So, when Seelan, who had been silent at the side, slowly untied the long spear's cloth cover, he narrowed his eyes and looked at Tang An. Do you think your fist is bigger than ours? Do you think one person can stop all of us? We have to try before we know. Tang In shrugged casually. He paused for a moment and waved his hand. At the very least, I won't have any problems stopping a loser like you. Arrogant. Not everyone knew Tang An. In fact, except for Wu Ding and the other two, the 7 or 8 Imperial consecrators who came with them had never seen Tang In before. In their impression, there was no such person among the brand's powerhouses. Previously, when they saw Wu Ding and Tang In laughing and talking, they didn't react for a while. It wasn't until Hai Ta made a move and Tang In seemed to disdain when Seelan that they understood the position of the enemy and immediately reprimanded him. However, what they didn't notice was that whether it was Hai Ta or when Seelan, the most talented disciple of the Sword God, they were silent and couldn't refute. The truth was that when Seelan was indeed defeated by Tang In, and he was defeated twice in a row, if it weren't for the Sword God as his master, he would have lost his life long ago. So confident that you can stop us. At this time, Wu Ding, who had been silent since Hai Ta spoke, suddenly raised his hand and pointed to the sky. Is it because of the friend above? Tang In wasn't surprised. He couldn't sense it from a distance, but at such a close distance and under suspicious circumstances, it was impossible for an expert of the same level to successfully sneak attack the other side. He shook his head and smiled. That was prepared for Elder Wu. I just have the confidence to stop the others except for you. Kid, you're courting death. Tang An's words seemed modest, but in fact, in addition to Elder Wu, there were nearly 10 other powerhouses of the Void Realm present. Such a luxurious and terrifying lineup, in Tang An's words, was like a leftover. In the eyes of everyone, he was too arrogant to have any friends. However, without waiting for the roar to fade, Wu Ding smiled and shook his head. He raised his hand and pinched his fingers into a sword and gently drew in the air. Come out, friend. With a hissing sound, a faint golden sword shadow came out. Like a ray of brilliant light, it instantly broke through the curtain of rain, broke through the haze of the sky, and drew a line between the sky and the earth. But in the next moment, the domineering sword shadow swept through the designated area, but it was calm and there was no movement. Wu Ding frowned when he saw this, but Tang In smiled and shook his head disapprovingly. What a joke! Bamatu was the strongest in the northern wilderness. He was a peerless expert of the same level as Wu Ding. Now that Wu Ding didn't even use his sword, how could it be so easy to force Bamatu out? But in this case, there was no point in continuing to hide. Ha! Heroic laughter suddenly resounded through the sky. The originally extremely gloomy gray clouds were violently swept by the hurricane, as if they were instantly dragged into a dye vat, becoming pitch black like ink. Since an old friend has sincerely invited me, then let's meet. Roar. Before he finished speaking, thousands of beasts suddenly roared in his ears. The dark clouds were like lions, tigers, snakes, and dragons. Hundreds of beasts appeared, and it was a spectacular sight. In just a short moment, the huge black clouds pressed down with the power to destroy a city. Savage 10,000 beasts art. It's you. Wu Ding couldn't help but shout when he saw this. His calm appearance disappeared without a trace. He pulled away Hai Ta, who was protecting him, and flipped his right hand. The sheathed longsword tied to Hai Ta's waist fell into his hand. In the next moment, a bright sword light soared into the sky. One sword from the east. The purpose of the Imperial family's consecrators was very clear. They were here to replace Wu Ding. But before they could react, Wu Ding did indeed make the first move. Once he made his move, it was a majestic giant sword light, bright and dazzling. To be able to cultivate to the Void Realm, the consecrator's eyesight was naturally unquestionable. They instantly recognized this overbearing sword move. It was the starting move of the famous sword gods, 3 swords, 1 sword from the east. Their expressions couldn't help but change greatly. To be able to make the sword god feel pressure and use a killing move without holding back, then the identity of the enemy. While everyone was thinking above, the thousands of beasts' black clouds had collided with the bright sword light. Roar, roar, roar. The rain collapsed, and the wind and clouds retreated. The world lost its sound. Only the roars of thousands of beasts continued to bombard everyone's ears. It was like a demonic sound that poured into everyone's ears. No other sound could be heard. The world lost its color. Only the dazzling golden light and the curtain-like night separated the two extremes, entangling and fighting, filling everyone's vision. Directly below, Ta and the others squatted down in unison. Various kinds of fighting lights roared out from their bodies, but they were barely 3 feet away from their bodies before they seemed to be forcefully suppressed by an invisible force in the void, causing them to shrink back. They were like a wisp of fallen leaves in a violent storm, and they bitterly held on. Obviously, a battle of this level was no longer something that so-called experts like them could interfere in. It was a success if they could protect themselves. In fact, they were unlucky. Bamada's target was only Wu Ding, but they were standing beside Wu Ding. Naturally, they were also covered by it. Now, the only one who could still easily deal with it was Tang In, the bystander. Looking at the spectacular scene in front of him, feeling the violent and explosive collision of forces. He touched his nose and couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. The older the ginger, the spicier it is. As mentioned before, there was almost no concept of sneak attacks between experts of the same level, but there was always a difference in who made the first move. Just now, it was Wu Ding who made the first move, but he didn't expect that the one hiding above was Bamatu. So, he just pinched his fingers as a greeting and wanted to force the other party to show up first. But Bamadu was different. He had waited here for 9 days, so he knew who Wu Ding was and what kind of strength he had. So, he made a move without mercy. Wu Ding's savage beast manipulation art. One was intentional, the other was unintentional. One was ready to attack, the other was hurriedly defending. The subtle difference between the first and the second was reflected in the current level of the battle. Only Wu Ding had suffered a small loss. Sure enough, with the Imperial transport ship as the center, the surrounding water was like a flock of sheep that was suddenly attacked by a hungry wolf. They screamed and fled in all directions, waves bursting. No, it was the hull of the ship that was sinking, or more accurately, it was the Imperial transport ship and the surrounding water that was sinking. It was as if a giant spirit's hand was pressing an inch by inch into the cold river water, raising the water level and dispersing the surrounding water. At this time, open, an old voice suddenly came out, and the sword light that was entangled with the black cloud of beasts suddenly shot out rays of golden light, splashing tens of thousands of feet, sweeping away the haze and darkness between heaven and earth. Boom, boom, boom. The river water overturned, and huge waves surged to the sky. Damn! He couldn't help but squint and subconsciously turned his head to avoid the dazzling light. Tang In lifted his foot and stomped on the bow of the ship. Whoosh! The small ship was swallowed by the huge waves and retreated rapidly, like an arrow leaving the bow. When he turned his head again, the bright golden light, the black cloud of beasts, and the Imperial transport ship had all disappeared. Only Wu Ding and the others were left standing on the water, their clothes fluttering wildly, and the huge hemispherical depression that was about hundreds of feet wide under their feet. The river water was flowing backwards. Bamu too. Standing high in the sky, Bamatu's beard and hair fluttered. He looked up to the sky and laughed. Long time no see, Wu Ding. Old friend, what do you think of my greeting gift? Chapter 1019. This was too good to be true. Wu Ding and the others were temporarily silent. They were probably shocked by Bamatu's appearance. Tang In, on the other hand, was overjoyed without any psychological pressure. He was just short of waving his hands and shouting, "Godfather," or something. It was no wonder that Tang In was so overjoyed. Wu Ding's title of sword god was not fake. Tang In admitted that he had no confidence in fighting with such a living legend. Once they started fighting, if he could not escape, then the result would be unpredictable. Fortunately, Bamadu was really powerful. In a head-on collision just now, although Bamatu had the upper hand from the situation, the strength of the two was indeed on par. In other words, before Bamatu completely fell, Tang In did not have to worry about Wu Ding's problem. And this was a good enough start. Of course, if it was good for Tang In, then it was bad for Hai Ta and the others. Damn it. Traitor. Bastard. Master thought so highly of you, but you actually colluded with the northern wilderness tribes. With a trembling roar, the giant sword in his hand was also trembling. He stared at Tang In, and his emotions were particularly fierce and irritable. Tang In saw this and could not help but frown slightly. He subconsciously felt a little puzzled. He spread out his hands and said, "Didn't you already confirm that I colluded with them? Why do you have to say it again to attract hatred? You are looking for death." Haita tightly pursed his lips, and a biting, cold, killing intent burst out from between his teeth. He seemed to have completely lost control of himself and was about to take a step forward to kill. Of course, this abnormal emotion was not just because he confirmed that Tang In colluded with the northern wilderness tribes. The most important thing was that after recognizing Bamatu, the strongest person in the northern wilderness, Haita was terrified. The thing he was most worried about was happening. The battle between Wu Ding and Bamatu was inevitable. This level of battle was not something they could interfere in. And with Wu Ding's physical condition, could he win? Or rather, even if he could win, what kind of price would he have to pay? Before Haita could take a step, Wu Ding grabbed his shoulder. The latter's expression had already calmed down, and he didn't care about the sea tower struggle. He raised his head and looked at Bamatu, who was standing in the wind and rain, and nodded lightly. "It's been a long time indeed, old man. If I hadn't heard little Tang mention you last year, I would have thought you were dead. I haven't paid you back with my sword and killed you with my own hands, so how could I bear to die first?" Shaking his head and laughing, Bamatu narrowed his eyes and stared at Wu Ding, not hiding the slightest trace of ruthlessness in his eyes. He nodded indifferently. "It's meaningless to talk about the past, but since you're here, let's put an end to it." He paused for a moment and looked around. Then, he pointed towards the depths of the river and said, "There are too many juniors here. How about we go there and settle things?" TSK, how straightforward. I like it. Tang In couldn't help but grin when he heard this. Basically, for those old fogies who had lived to the age of Wooding and Bamatu, if they were talking detail about love and grudges, family feuds, national feuds, and so on, it would take a few days and nights to finish. However, it was precisely because they had lived to this age that they knew that these were all empty words. In the end, they still had to fight. As for the feelings of mutual appreciation and deep hatred, they could first kill each other and then go to the corpse or the grave to talk about it. Bamada chuckled. "It's because you have too many juniors. Why? Are you afraid that I'll make a move on them?" Ru Ying's eyes swept over Haita and the others, focusing on Wensilin. He shook his head and chuckled disdainfully. "This is your proud disciple? Heh, very ordinary. I forgot to tell you, I also recently took in a disciple who is stronger than him, much stronger." Among the people present, Wensilin was the youngest, so it was not bad that Bamada thought that he was Wu Ding's disciple. This was probably the mindset of ordinary old people. If they couldn't win, they would place their hopes on the next generation. And when they saw that the other party's descendant was inferior to their own, they would be very happy, even happier than if they had one. Rubbing his nose, Tang In couldn't help but ridicule. "You're so long-winded and long-winded." Pause for a while. He thought about Wensilin, who had been defeated by him, and then thought about Bamatu's disciple, who was the youth of the Charm Fox tribe that he had taught. He couldn't help but praise Bamatu and sigh with emotion. "You really have good eyesight." Of course, this was all in his mind. Tang In wasn't stupid. How could he make his presence known at this time? If he accidentally angered Wu Ding, he would be struck by his sword. Then, he would be in big trouble. But perhaps because he ridiculed too much before Tang En could recover, Wu Ding subconsciously looked over and frowned. "Your disciple is him?" Tang En was stunned. 10,000 alpacas ran through his mind. Bamitu was also stunned. He then looked at Tang En with a smile that wasn't a smile and shook his head. "I don't have the ability to accept such a disciple." Wu Ding nodded. "That's true. I also don't have such ability." Fuck. Looking at Hai Ta, Wen Silin, and the imperial family's consecrators' gazes, Tang En's mouth twitched. He felt like a firefly in the dark night, bright like a star, bright like a dazzling star. No matter how he tried to hide, it was useless, of course, regardless of Tang En's self-pity. The focus of the scene was still Wu Ding and Bamitu. After changing the topic, Bamitu waved his hand and simply turned around and flew into the depths of the fog. As for what he said before about killing Wu Ding's juniors, it was naturally just a joke. This didn't mean that Hai Ta and the others weren't qualified. After all, they were also Void Masters. If Wu Ding wasn't here today, Bamitu would definitely kill them. It would be considered as eliminating some threats for the tribe's juniors. But now that Wu Ding was here, Hai Ta and the others were undoubtedly not enough in Bamitu's eyes. That's right, to put it bluntly, it meant that he was ignoring them. "Master," Hai Ta wanted to say something in a trembling voice, but Wu Ding waved his hand and interrupted. "Don't say anything. Saying anything at this time will only disturb my mind. Relax, your master is the sword god, the strongest person in the Shiza continent. Even if I'm old and useless, as long as I have the sword in my hand, I won't lose." It was obviously a light tone, without any ripples. It was obviously a narcissistic attitude that was extremely annoying. But when it came from Wu Ding's mouth, the people around him were excited and bowed in unison. Was this the demeanor of the sword god who had dominated the continent for more than 100 years? The distance was too far. When Wu Ding's words drifted with the wind, it was even more light. Slightly startled, Tang En no longer had the slightest thought of complaining in his heart. Instead, he seemed to be affected by it and had a sense of ridicule. However, it was only for a short moment, because as soon as he looked up, Tang En's expression suddenly changed, and cold sweat fell like rain. In the distance, Wu Ding slowly rose into the air. He glanced at Meng Qi and flicked his wrist as if he was careless. With a shrill whistle, the river's surface, which was several hundred feet away from Meng Qi and Meng Qi, which had calmed down a little, was instantly split into two by a golden sword shadow. F***CK. Bullshit demeanor of the sword god. So you won't lose because you know how to launch a sneak attack. As soon as he stepped on the boat, Tang En opened his arms without thinking. His figure retreated rapidly like an owl, instantly drawing an arc-shaped gully on the river surface. Boom! As soon as he dodged the attack, the strange boat that was sailing on this route was instantly torn apart, not even leaving behind a piece of it. It was your idea to destroy the teleportation array in the north, right? I'll remember this for the time being. I'll come to you later. I hope you'll still be alive by then. Wu Ding didn't look back to see the result of his hand. He knew that this sword couldn't hurt Tang En. It was just a greeting in advance. Of course, when he defeated Bamitu and returned, it wouldn't just be a greeting. However, no need. Stepping on the river's surface, Tang En narrowed his eyes and looked up at Wu Ding's back. How about a bet? After I'm done here, I'll come to you first. Wu Ding came to Tang En because he was confident in defeating Bamitu. Tang En went to Wu Ding because he was proud of defeating more than 10 void-level powerhouses. Who wasn't a powerhouse? Who didn't have the heart of a powerhouse? Not fighting with Wu Ding didn't mean that Tang En was afraid. It was just because his current battlefield was here. After dealing with Hai Ta and the others, he would come to you. Still, Tang En's biggest reliance was never Bamitu, but himself. Wu Ding still didn't look back. His figure in the distance paused for a while in the air, and then accelerated into the smoke in the middle of the river and disappeared. Chapter 10:20. The wind and rain were gloomy. You heard it, right? I'm in a hurry. I'm very busy. Retracting his gaze from Wu Ding's departing figure, Tang looked at the ashen-faced Hai Ta and the others. He spread his hands and said, then one-on-one. After a pause, he shook his head and said, forget it. I guess you guys don't want to either. Let's just gang up. Huh, arrogant. Junior, you're courting death. Some of the slightly shrewd people laughed out of anger, and some of them simply shouted to kill. Not to mention the group of royal consecrators, even Hai Ta and Winston, who were more familiar with Tang Yin, were shocked by Tang Yin's arrogant attitude. Of course, they were shocked speechless. Although Wu Ding had left, with their luxurious and terrifying lineup, they were still able to win. Not to mention dealing with Tang Yin alone, even if they were to be dragged to the front line, they would still be the peak force that could control the situation of a region. But now listen to what Tang Yin said. Gang up, and in a hurry? This was the rhythm of going all out and being shameless. However, 1, 2, 3, Tang Yin did not seem to hear these taunts. He raised his hand and counted with a serious expression. 7, 8, 9, 10. Exactly 10. 8 royal family consecrators, plus Sea Tower and Winsillin. Wasn't that just right for 10 people? Nodding with relief, Tang Yin grinned. He waved his hand generously at Hai Ta and the others who looked at him as if he was a madman. Come at me together. I want to fight 10 of you. Madman? Forget it. There's nothing to say. Kill him and go support Lord Sword God. Who's coming? Be careful. Just as the group of royal consecrators who wanted to kill were mocking and ridiculing, a warning cry suddenly sounded. Everyone subconsciously looked up, their vision blurred, and that unknown face appeared in front of them in a flash. And dozens of feet away, Tang Yin's figure was still stepping on the river, shadow, doppelganger. There was no expert in a fight, since they were destined to meet in life and death. How could Tang Yin waste time on words? With just a flash, he instantly broke through the curtain of rain and arrived. The pitch-black dagger in his hand drew a line of demonic water and slashed towards the throat of a royal consecrator at the back of the crowd. This was the middle-aged man with the lowest strength and was about to touch the threshold of void level. However, before Tang Yin could smoothly pass through the crowd, a purple spear suddenly stabbed out from the side to block him. It was Winston. He was also the one who had shouted the warning. This result was actually not surprising. If one were to ask everyone present who was most familiar with Tang Yin, then it would undoubtedly be Winston, who had been defeated by Tang Yin twice and suffered great humiliation. He was very clear about Tang Yin's fighting style. Against Tang Yin's sneak attack and abnormal close combat ability, he had to guard against it and be cautious. Finally, he caught the opportunity. None of the people present were mediocre. In this situation, as long as the spear could hold Tang Yin back for a moment, the masters who reacted and focused fire could completely send Tang Yin to hell. Winston was very confident in this. He had endured until now and did not even deliberately remind everyone to be wary of Tang Yin's close combatability. Wasn't it all for this moment? Was this the perfect shot that had been deliberately calculated? However, before a ferocious smile could climb onto his face, in a flash, Winston unintentionally met Tang Yin's gaze and slightly raised the corner of his mouth. Was this mockery? Before he could understand, a violent roar sounded in his ears. Freeze! Winston was even more confused when he heard this. He subconsciously felt that Tang Yin had really gone crazy. The facts were clear. With such a great opportunity, there was no reason for him to obediently obey. Was there? But the real situation was that as soon as the violent roar fell, the spear in Winston's hand that was rapidly thrusting out paused for a moment. With an expression as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight, he watched Tang Yin roll past the tip of the spear like the wind. Winston did not do it on purpose, and it was impossible for him to do it on purpose. For this, he could solemnly swear to the God of Light, although the God of Light, who had always been at odds with the Sword God, might not pay attention to him. It was just that he could not move. His limbs, and even his entire body, could not move. At this moment, Winston even felt that time had strangely stopped. The people around him were like him, frozen in their movements and expressions, either retreating in shock or raising their hands to block the attack. They were like dead statues. Only in the corner of his eyes, Tang In, who was like the wind, was still moving forward, passing through the gaps in the crowd. He stretched out his hand. A faint blade light flashed and swept past the middle-aged priest's neck. With a hiss of the wind, it drew an arc of blood-colored water, relaxed and casual. Immediately, he rushed forward. Don't, In the next moment, the long spear pierced through the air, and a cry of surprise rang out. The strange situation then disappeared. Everyone subconsciously turned around and looked at the middle-aged companion, who was also at a loss. He clutched his throat and staggered back a few steps. Blood could not be stopped from gushing out between his fingers. Then, he fell backward on the surface of the river. With a splash, the water splashed everywhere. The scene was silent. Everyone stood in a daze, unable to accept it. They stared blankly at the river under their feet. With just a few ups and downs, the figure of their companion was swallowed up. A priest of the royal family, a powerhouse who had touched the threshold of the void level. It was just a simple face-to-face encounter, and he died just like that. Dozens of feet away, Tang In stopped rushing forward. He turned around and looked at the group of people who were stunned. He smiled and shrugged, "Don't mind it. It's just a greeting in the way of an assassin." What was an assassin's greeting? Of course, it was to take the opponent by surprise and strike first to gain the upper hand. What Tang In did just now was actually the same as the greeting gift that Bamatu gave to Wu Ding not long ago. Even the techniques were similar. Bamatu used the famous art of 10,000 beasts, while Tang In used the shadow clone technique and the frenzied feast. The first move was a big move, simple and violent, and the results were not bad. They killed a priest of the royal family in a single face-to-face encounter. Ha! There are 9 left. Boom, boom, boom. Before Tang In's voice fell, the sound of thunder suddenly came clearly from the center of the river. The waves on the water's surface even affected this place. Looking from afar, the area was completely divided into two, evolving into two extreme worlds. The hazy black clouds in the sky pressed down violently, and the bright sword light below rushed into the sky. They entangled, collided, and swallowed each other. Although they had not personally experienced it, just by looking at this terrifying power, they knew that the water area had completely become a disaster zone, and no one was allowed to enter. After a pause, Tang In could not help but laugh and shake his head. Really, the two old guys' fighting passion is surging so urgently. He raised his hand and hooked his finger at Hai Ta when Seelin and the other 9 people who had come back to their senses. Then we, the younger generation, can't be lazy. Come, you won't leave here alive today. After saying this, his figure flashed, and he retreated into the smoke on the river's surface and disappeared. What martial technique was that just now? When Seelin suddenly asked in a loud voice. Haha, guess. Don't joke around. No matter what it was, the unknown was the most terrifying. So, how could Tang In easily tell when Seelin the answer? Besides, Tang In had only mastered the slaughter feast skill not long ago, so its power was not obvious. Just now, when Seelin and the others had never seen such a strange martial technique before and were caught off guard. Otherwise, with their void-level cultivation, how could they be so easily frozen by the weak rules of the battlefield? Go kill him. Gritting his teeth, Haita did not hesitate and raised his one-handed sword to chase after him. However, the surrounding royal family consecrators looked at each other, their feet not moving, and their expressions were hesitant. That's right, they were a little scared. Of course, no matter who it was, seeing an expert whose strength was not far from their own being instantly killed in front of their eyes would leave a shadow in their hearts. And that martial technique just now was indeed too strange. It was actually able to freeze them for a moment. It must be known that a moment in a battle between experts was enough to determine the outcome of more than 10 battles. If they did not solve this problem, they really did not dare to chase after him. Haita's face suddenly sank as he angrily asked, "Why aren't you chasing? Are you scared?" Ahem. With two coughs, a gray-haired royal family consecrator frowned and walked out. "Not scared, but Sir Haita, you have to tell us who this young man is? What kind of strength does he have?" Senior brother, stopping Haita from reprimanding, when Seelan took over the conversation and said directly, "His name is Tang En from the Grey Coat Army. His strength is very strong. His battle chi realm is probably around mid-level void level." Just mid-level void level? The royal family consecrators were obviously a little doubtful. Of course, mid-level void level strength was not low, but there was one among them. With this kind of strength, not to mention that it was impossible to kill their companion in an instant, it was impossible to easily pass through under their noses when Seelan waved his hand. "I know what everyone is thinking, but he is different from ordinary void-level warriors. His speed is very fast, his movement is strange, and he is especially good at close combat. Remember, don't let him get close, otherwise, even if your strength is similar, you will not be spared. So I suggest that if you search separately, at least 3 people in a group." After a pause, "As for that martial skill just now, it was the first time I saw it, but it is not enough to worry about. At least it is not as terrifying as you think. Otherwise, he would not have chosen to quickly retreat after killing one person." The consecrators could not help but nod when they heard this. This was the truth. They were mainly afraid of the strange skill that could freeze the body, but now combined with the situation of Tang En's attack, they understood a little and felt much more at ease. However, what they did not know, or perhaps they did not care, was that they did not grasp the main point. The most terrifying thing about Tang En was not the half-baked slaughter feast skill, but his abnormal close combat ability. Although, when Sin had already reminded him of this and set up countermeasures, he still hid some content in the end. If when Seelan could directly say that he also brought 3 royal family consecrators to kill Tang En last time, but in the end, 1 died and 2 were injured, and the 2 who escaped had to pay the price of an arm, then these powerhouses who were also royal family consecrators would definitely pay special attention to this. But unfortunately, when Seelan, who also wanted to appease everyone and not make them too scared to run away, did not say this important truth. So from the beginning, the scales of this battle that seemed to have a great disparity had actually begun to tilt. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.